I'm ready to
All
roll,
right,
Madam
Jerry.
Mayor. Ready to roll.
Okay.
All right.
Lead us off.
It's good to be back with you. I have nothing but good memories of this room and the time I spent with you. And that includes Halen, who was in the audience the last time we met together, right? So it's a good memory, good association. And I have enjoyed building a relationship with the city of Malibu, all with the ultimate goal of serving the residents, businesses, stakeholders, and everybody here, which is what your role is as elected officials, right? To really govern, to lead, as we talked about the last time we were together. We're not going to cover the same stuff we talked about last time. You know, contexts have changed. You've had some major issues that have impacted. Is it more than half your city or about half your city with the major disasters that have happened? A lot of context changes. And you know, back in, when was it, 2008, Joseph Nye from the Kennedy School of Government. He's a Harvard guy at the Kennedy School there who goes in and out of the White House in his younger years, depending on who was in office, right? As a consultant or assuming a role of some kind, Joseph Nye. He wrote a book called The Powers to Lead, plural, The Powers to Lead. And his basic context is this. When it comes to being a leader, there are three elements that are really important. There are, when it comes for any one of us, it can change, right? There are leaders, there are followers, and there is context, right? And when it comes to the latter, it can change everything. One of the examples he gives, right? Because with different contexts, different leaders emerge. And you've probably seen that with all that's gone on here in the city of Malibu. And what I mean by that is his example is Rudy Giuliani. He says, Rudy Giuliani was a well thought of mayor in the city of New York. He addressed a number of things that were pleasing to New Yorkers. But, he wasn't really viewed as, even though it's a major city, a candidate for president. And then September 11th, 9/11 hit, right? September 11th, 2001, what we call 9/11. And all of a sudden the context changed. Something of a first instance happened for many of us in our lifetimes, right? An attack on American soil, if you will. And I remember I was on my way to court that day, and I'm watching these towers burning on our broadcast there, and I'm wondering, is there even going to be court today, or what's happening? Turns out I got to court, it was shut down, and so I just went back home, spent that day watching the broadcast of all of this. And about 36 hours later, right, in a nice blue shirt like Doug right there, sleeves rolled up, looking a bit disheveled, Mayor Giuliani grabbed that podium. And he says, we New Yorkers are resilient. We Americans are courageous. We will not let the cowardly acts of a few, blah, 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 blah. And the context had changed. And I remember watching him and thinking, oh man, this is making me feel better, right? A leader who emerges from that context. Winston Churchill basically did the same thing on a larger scale in World War II. And he became the Winston Churchill we all quote now. Always a well thought of aristocratic family and MP, but nothing like he became with the threat of the Axis power. So when the context changes, different leaders emerge based on the needs of the organization, based on the needs of that context. And you have certainly experienced that, right? As all these major changes have impacted so many. And we've needed to pivot our priorities, which we'll talk more about tomorrow as we facilitate that discussion. But for our purposes here today, just understand, followers can usurp a great deal of power by resisting a leader. Power they don't have, they can gain, they can embrace and harness and hijack, if you will, by refusing to follow and doing a number of other things. We need to ensure that in the context that the city of Malibu finds itself right now, that we are ready, willing, and able to do those things and to work with our executive leadership team in a way that makes the most sense for all those that we serve and all those impacted by what you do. And that's part of what this is, aligning our paradigms. But it goes further than that. It also addresses, right, what we need to do to ensure we are operating at the highest level of providing other protection. For example, in your membership in California Joint Powers Insurance Authority, sometimes known as CalJPIA or the JPIA. And for those who are less knowledgeable, right, we need to know, we've been using JPAs since the late 70s when we had the insurance crisis, right? And that insurance crisis, everybody was insuring everything. All these cities were being insured, and the insurance companies got such an interest return on the money they were collecting, they weren't doing their due diligence and going out and inspecting whether Malibu had trip and fall hazards, whether there was a tree potential hazard somewhere that could wreak havoc or cause injury or create other exposures. They weren't doing their due diligence because they all felt, hey, no matter what happens to the insurance companies, we're going to be able to cover it because we're making all this money, right? And then, boom, the economy changed. And all of a sudden, cities like Malibu, who were paying $50,000 a year for general liability coverage, right, for their insurance or whatever the number would be, all of a sudden, that number increased to $250,000 in one fiscal year. And no, cities weren't ready for that. So in that crisis moment, the state legislature and a few brain trust people up in Sacramento who knew this stuff, they got together and said, hey, let's pass some legislation that will allow us to create joint powers authorities. And these JPAs afforded us the opportunity as the city of Malibu, as the city of Santa Monica, as the city of Calabasas or Agoura Hills, to come together and act like a big city. LA could self-insure, so could San Diego, Oakland, San Francisco, Sacramento, all big enough to set aside a certain amount of reserve based on what the actuaries told them was how much we needed to reserve for general liability, how much we needed to reserve for workers' comp, how much we needed to reserve for property, right, and that kind of thing. But we could not. Malibu's not built for that, and most communities are not. So with the JPAs that were born in the late 70s, it gave us the opportunity to come together and act like a self-insured big city, right? So we don't have commercial insurance, and quite frankly, the insurance companies aren't really interested in coming back to the world of public entities, because no matter how small you are, you're seen as a default, right? Because you're backed by the almighty tax dollars. So that being said, the whole paradigm shifted then, and some municipalities resisted because they wanted their autonomy, and they didn't want to have to answer to a greater good, if you will, and they weren't very good members of joint powers authorities, right? Because they wanted to know, hey, how's this going to impact us, and so forth. And so it was a difficult learning curve in the 80s, even into the 90s. But eventually, everybody understood. If we want a viable, sustainable city of Malibu, right, and that we are covered, the cupboard isn't bare for coverage when these catastrophic events occur or whatever else, then we need to be a team player. And we have to look at the greater good. And that's what those boards do. And so yours, CalJPI, has a big board, right? All the members are represented on that board. And who is Malibu's representative on JPI's board? Marianne? Okay. And so Marianne has to do this. She has to take turns wearing her Mayor of Malibu hat, right? And then take it off at times when we're talking about, should we settle this case with the city of Lomita? You know, this fire engine ran into this or that. I'm totally making that up, right? Where the fire engine ran into so-and-so, Marianne has to put on her JPA hat and say, you know, it would be better to settle, even though the city doesn't want to, because they feel like there's some holes in this case, etc. Overall, this is a nice controlled settlement versus, you know, what could happen. And Lomita may vote against providing authority to settle the case, but most of the other members vote for it. And that's the world you live in, right? Changing hats. And whoever's on that board, you're going to need to do that. Yes.
Is that an advisory position then? Like, are you advising the...
No, she has an actual vote.
Oh, wow.
On that, yeah. So, I mean, I'm not sure how all of JPIA works.
Yeah, I'm not that high up.
Okay, so
those things. Just general membership.
Yeah, so the CalJPIA has a staff. And because they're full-time staff, they too are public entity employees, right? So they can have PERS retirement, et cetera. They ultimately guide, they create the staff reports. They have to comply with the Brown Act. They create the staff reports. And for closed session, they will produce reports on cases that they're seeking settlement authority for, because they can't just decide that on their own. they can only do that up to a certain level, right? The litigation manager over there and the liability people like Paul Zeglovich and others, they have certain authority that the board of JPI has given them. You can settle cases on your own up to 50,000, right? Or I don't know, I'm making up that number as well. But when it comes to anything in excess of that, it has to get board approval, right? And that's what happens. So there's a group, either an executive committee or a full board. It's more likely the executive committee of JPI, which consists of folks like you, and they decide to give authority or not to settle or to continue to litigate those cases. Yeah. So that's the world we've been in now for some time, right? And you've met with them. You've met with them recently and had a meeting to discuss the status of things, and we're not going to talk about that here. But all of this is designed to align our paradigms to do what's in the best interest of Malibu, and a lot of times that is aligned with how we can meet the expectations of those folks at our JPA, right? And you will know that, right, from discussions you've had with others. But more importantly, in the day-to-day operation, having nothing to do or less to do with the JPA, how are we effectively governing this city, right? And knowing each of you, having met with each of you recently, I would say overall, where I see vast improvement is in your engagement with one another, right? I wasn't here a couple of years ago when things were a little more conflict-oriented, dare I say a little hostile. Contentious with city council meetings and the governance team. I don't believe with the steps you've taken, like you've created your code of conduct, right, for governance team members. Is that the name of it, Bruce? What did you call it? Code of conduct?
Code of conduct.
Yeah, and they worked on it, and it was you two, Doug and Bruce, right? And you came up with a nice one. And I've seen many. I've read many of those, and it's nice. Personally, I would want a little bit more in there, but that's just an opinion. That's one man's paradigm talking, you know. And I think it's where we would disagree, Bruce. I would want a little more declaratory stuff in there than you two ultimately came to. So let's press forward with this and talk about it. Just a quick refresher on one slide. This is what we covered when we met last November, right, or October, whenever it was. We talked about basically the 4 pillars of what you do as a governance team. And Halen, since then, you've been to the League of California Cities new council member orientation, things like that, so I'm sure they drill down even further. But your priority, set the vision for this city. How can we expect directors, the managers under them, etc., and most importantly, our primary boots on the ground, which is Candace right now, and Richard, to know how to prioritize, how to allocate resources, etc., if we don't have a clear vision for what we want to be, who we want to be, and how we want to be it, etc. So how does a director in an ideal city set their objectives for the next year, 3 years, 5 years? It's based on the vision of this team right here. Right? We talked about that, and it remains true. You have to then adopt the policies and procedures that will build a structure within which we will operate to achieve that vision. And so with those policies and procedures, that whole framework, you allow us to move freely within those parameters to successfully discharge their duties and responsibilities. Now, at some point, we're going to be adopting more framework as AI is continues to rush onto the scene. We're going to have to be asked to address a few things when it comes to artificial intelligence, right? That's coming up for many cities, right? That is the case. And policies related to it, unless you already have them. Then you go out in the world, right? This is you're an elected person. You're out in the world, and Steve's out there shaking hands and letting people know, hey, here's what we're doing, right? Our priority right now is to establish policies that will make it as streamlined and path resistance for people seeking to rebuild, etc. And he's letting people know that right out there, as is Mary Ann as our mayor. And Bruce is our vice mayor and the rest of our council members. We're out there in the community promoting, right? Promoting what we are doing for Malibu, with Malibu, and for the long-term sustainability of Malibu. And then, right, this is the big one. We get all those things there, but great, we have to attract and retain an executive, a city manager, right, to be your workhorse, if you will, to be the leader and guide of all these incredibly talented directors, and then their managers, and then the rest of the employees beneath that. And so this is a big one, right? It's a big one. And over the years, I only know your history back to Reva, right? But Reva and then Steve, and then interim now with Candace. That's the scope of my history for the record, right, on Reva. But this one's critical because you need to vet and make sure that this person understands your expectations, right? What they can expect. No surprises, right, when it comes right down to it, of what it's going to be like to be the shepherd of the vision, if you will, right, when they come here and work for the city of Malibu. And I'm confident you'll be able to find that person, right? I'm confident you'll be able to do that because even though you're a small town, by many standards, you are the city of Malibu, right? And that comes with a certain cachet, reputation, etc. Now, I will say not all that reputation is great for people in the industry who work in the city manager world. I understand you've got a lot of applications, and I think I was talking to Bruce about that. It's a combination of things, right? Malibu is a lovely place to work. It's a little remote, makes it challenging for some people to want to come to work here. But also there are a lot of city administrators out of work. So, you're going to get applications. I don't want you to be lulled into a false sense of security that all is well because we got 50 people applying. That's not necessarily the case, just so we're clear about that.
No, but it's an indication that they're willing to come in.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if we have 3 applications, I think so there's some benefit to the number of people that apply. There's some message there.
The message is that people are looking for opportunities as a city manager. They are, right? And you have one open. So, here's your opportunity to decide of those 50 who will be the best fits. I know you've got good people working for you right now in interim roles, and there's no reason you can't find somebody who is going to effectively be able to embrace your vision, enhance it, and, dare I say, every great city manager I know pushes back a little bit, like, well, honestly, Halen, I'm not sure this is something that fits in the priorities of the governance team as a whole. So can we table this, set it up for discussion? You want somebody who's going to push back and not just be a rubber stamp individual, right? You want somebody who's going to say, hey, we're treading down a path, Steve, that isn't okay because of X, Y, or Z, etc. So any other comments on this component? Just a quick reminder, refresher, if you will. Good, okay. So when it comes down to then, what we talked about, this is the last repeat slide from the last time, there's only 2. The reason we went through all that stuff is because we want to keep you safe. You have certain immunities in the government code that afford you the opportunity to not be liable for certain behaviors if you stay within the scope of your governance team role. When you go rogue or maverick, start engaging in things outside of that, and Trevor would be the authority on this, then it could be problematic, right, when it comes to it. And based on what I discussed with each of you and your thoughts, and I don't know if I thanked you, but I really do thank you for making time for me. We seem to be doing loads better on the not directing the work of people, but I don't know that we are self-aware enough as individuals or as a collective about how our behaviors are impacting our employees, present company included, right? We may not be totally aware on how our non-directing the work but still engaged is impacting our team and having the adverse impact of being burdensome, right? And that's the challenge. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But that was the reason we covered a lot of that. Here's your role. We want you to stay there so you're safe and you don't open yourself up to personal liability in any way. Anything to add to that, my lawyer friend Bruce?
Nope.
Good shape. All right. Let's do a little exercise, if you would, with me. All right? Because I want to talk about your paradigm, because it has everything to do with what we're doing here in Malibu. Everything.
I think I did have a question.
Yes, please.
Can you go back to the last slide? So council gives direction, then monitors the execution and implementation. Is that what? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Oh. So I think I would need more, I guess, the monitors, like, to stay in lane, right? When we give the direction, but then monitors without being overburdensome, I think is what I would probably shovel it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect comment, observation, and we will be addressing.
Okay, thank you.
We will be addressing. So thanks, Amy, for that. All right, a little exercise. I'm going to do this with, right now, each one of you is going to give me an answer to what you see. We're going to do a little Rorschach right here. Right? I'm trying to, vet who the sociopath is on this council. And so we're gonna start with Doug. We're gonna start with Doug. Number one, whatever your impression is when you see this image, Bruce, don't be influenced by his powerful, suggestive influence. All right, you keep your original thought. Same Marianne, same Halen, same Steve. Keep your original thought. Now yours may be the same as Doug's, but if it's your original thought, just make sure you share that. Are you ready? No pressure, Doug. You ready?
I just want you to know, when I've done this before, I've always answered hot dog.
I like hot dogs too. All right, Doug, what is this?
A flower.
Very good. Bruce?
It's part of a skeletal system.
Very good. Marianne?
Yeah.
I saw killed system.
Yeah, some version of that.
I was gonna say a pelvic.
Some anatomical thing? Pelvis?
I was
Yeah.
thinking of female, like, or a pelvic.
I was going to go to too, but actually
I was
keep
gonna
it broad.
do
Sorry.
We may have, Kelsey, we may have to schedule a sexual harassment. Right after
They've
this.
taken their training.
Okay, good. So those are all great answers, and some people are cautious and don't say pelvis, but a lot of people see pelvis on this one. Right, my favorite answer to this one is Eiffel Tower. Do you see that vision up there?
Yeah.
I love that. I think my brain's always on vacation, and that's why I love that, right? It's always on vacation. The most common answer to this Rorschach ink blot, and you'll see it real quick, is crabs.
So they're on the sides.
Yeah, 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. Blue crabs, right there, right there.
I thought the
Is
exercise
that
to
a
put it all
piece of-
together in a cohesive answer, though,
Yeah,
not multiple things.
Yeah, I didn't think we were
I'll
parceling.
just give you that one,
Well, I
right?
was
There's
gonna
the
say, is
most
there an
common
East
answer.
Coast bend to that and a West Coast bend to that?
Nantucket.
Very good question, Marianne. All right, let's start with Steve this time, and we'll work our way back. We're only going to do 3 of these, but we're illustrating a point here. Are you ready, Steve?
Absolutely.
Here it comes. What is that?
Bat.
Halen?
I see a moth.
They went with batter moth initially.
Bat.
All right, the most common answer to this one, bat or moth. Right? So very good, very good. You fit right in on what most people perceive. Now,
Damn.
I love it when people,
Average.
when people see a butterfly, and just a couple days ago, somebody said butterfly to me on Monday, a large group I was with, and I love it when people say butterfly, because that's the ugliest butterfly I have ever seen, right? If you turn it upside down, I could see that a little bit more. But when somebody sees a butterfly out of that, I'm thinking, this person I need to make a note of, right? Say Candace is the one who saw the butterfly. If I'm ever feeling down or a little bit, a low level of energy, or I need my spirits lifted, I'm going to go find Candace and go to lunch with her. Because anybody who can see a butterfly out of that ugly thing is somebody who's going to lift my spirits, right? That's how I analyze this in my
They might have a really tough life, and that's the best they can get out of it.
Yeah, it's true, Bruce, it's true. All right, let's do the last one. We'll start in the middle. Marianne, go over to Doug, Steve, and your last, Halen. All right, here we go. What is this, Marianne?
Yeah, I see like lions on the side.
Thank you.
Yeah, I saw two leopards or lions on the sides, but the rest of it, who knows? Mountain in the middle.
Face mask.
Face mask, very good.
2 rats climbing a mountain.
2 rats.
Wow, Steve, I'm impressed. I saw a big sailboat with sails,
Oh,
and then
cool.
2 leopards or animals on the sides, which were part of the boat.
Like that.
Very
Yeah,
nice.
thanks.
My favorite answer to this is cruise ship, right? Either
Oh.
pulling away or pulling in.
Yeah.
Again, brain's always on vacation, right? My brain.
Ah,
Most common answer to this, 4-legged animal. 4-legged animal. Right, so some
Not
version
into
of
a
it.
cat.
Yeah, to me they look like either badgers or raccoons. I can't quite tell, right? But there they are. So who saw this correctly?
Nobody.
All of it.
Or
we all saw-
the alternative works too. Nobody or everybody,
Everybody.
right? It depends on your paradigm, right? Everybody's paradigm is unique. There are over 8 billion paradigms on planet Earth. 8 billion. That is a huge number. We've lost sight of it. We have lost sight of what a billion is, but that's a huge number. Your paradigm, right? My usage, definition of the word, all the assumptions, beliefs, and values that give context to our world and how we process it. I have been sharing the same words with all of you, but I promise you, you're all getting different messages, or you're all processing through your paradigm. Where is he going with this? This is not what I expected, right? Or, hey, this is more enjoyable than what I expected. Whatever the context is, depends on your paradigm. The Doug paradigm, with all of its elements of working in business leadership, executive stuff, right, and all the challenges and pitfalls that come with that, all influence your paradigm and how you see the world. Bruce, your legal paradigm is so obvious. If I didn't know you were a lawyer, I would still know you're a lawyer, okay, kind of thing. So we all have these unique paradigms, the assumptions, beliefs, and values. Where you grew up, Steve, influences your paradigm. The generation in which you grew up influences your paradigm. Your religion, if any, your atheism, your ancestry. Where do your people come from? You have a Polish last name? Are your people Polish? Do they come from Mexico, like mine? Jalisco and Sinaloa, Mexico? Do they come from, fill in the blank, right? And then what languages do you speak? Are you married? Are you happily married? Do you have kids? Do you have no kids and want kids? Like me, do you have too many kids? They're all grown adults, not contributing to society, so I feel okay about it. So our paradigms are very unique, but let's be clear about it. Here's the point we're going to make. 8 billion. More specifically, we hit that number in October of 22. Today, in June of 25, we have 8.2 billion paradigms. Now in California, especially here in Malibu, we have lost sight of 1 million. There's no question we've lost sight of 1 million. Someone says, oh yeah, I'm worth $1 million. Oh, so you own a condo, that's 500 square feet in Malibu. Okay, very good, right? We've lost sight of 1 million a long time ago, right, in our world. But billion is still a huge number, still a huge number. And let's put that in context here. If I said to you, to anyone in the room, how long ago was 1 million seconds? What would your answer be? Any guesses? Shot in the dark.
Yesterday.
1 million seconds ago, all good guesses, was about 11 days ago. Okay, 11 days, 13 hours, something like that. That's 1 million seconds ago. By contrast, how long ago was 1 billion seconds?
1,000 times whatever the last
11,000
answer.
32 years ago. That's 1 billion. That's a huge difference between 1 million and 1 billion. And we put together these packages where, we send 1 billion here, 50 billion there, 100 billion there, right, to foreign governments because we do that for a variety of reasons, whether we agree or not, it's happening. Those dollars are going. And so with the $1 billion packages that keep coming, right, we start to get desensitized, but it's a huge number. Just for the sake of fun here, how long ago was 1 trillion seconds, as we put into context, our $36 trillion debt? 1 trillion seconds ago was about 32,000 years ago. Just shy of 32,000 years. 3 ice ages ago. And we have that $36 trillion debt. All right, I'm going to get off that soapbox now, right? And share with you that with 8 billion paradigms in the world, are any one of my fine council members here today thinking that you have been blessed and anointed with the right paradigm? The rest of us are lucky that we get to be in the same room with you, Marianne, because you are the queen of the paradigm universe. Anybody think that about themselves? All right, so if there is no, and there is no king or queen of the paradigm universe, the challenge we have as we govern, as we interact with city leadership, is we engage in behaviors where we act like king or queen of the paradigm universe. As if there's only one right way to do this, and it's right here in my paradigm. That's how I know it's right. When we project our paradigm out onto others, what we are doing is creating a foundation for conflict. Right? If I say, there's only one right way to do this, Richard, and it's this, right? How often is that a true statement? In the operation of a municipality, there's only one right way to do this. I will share with you, if we're running part of that municipality, if we had a wastewater treatment plant, and we had to comply with federal regulations, on the effluent this and that and the other, right? So we don't have an adverse impact on the environment. Yeah, there is a right way following those regulations and how many this or that water can contain as it outflows from us, right? But those are operationally minimal. Most of the stuff we do and the stuff we direct is very discretionary. And going back to Halen's question earlier, what is that balance of guiding versus overstepping or being burdensome to the leadership team? So much of it is the lawyer answer. It depends, right? How you oversee that guidance. But let's be clear. It is so rare that there is a single right way to do it. So when do we start acting like king or queen of the paradigm universe and what we do? When we start projecting our paradigm as if it's universal truth, rather than just our opinion. Right? It is 100% okay for you to say to your colleagues, for you to say to city leadership, to a director who's chatting with you, well, in my opinion, what I think should happen would be this. That's just based on my experience and what I know. That's one thing. But if you're like, hey, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing it the right way? A whole different measure comes out on how we're going to successfully engage one another. So no one took out the sword at Malibu and dubbed the king of the paradigm universe in Malibu, right, Bruce?
Yeah.
No one did that. So we don't have that person here today, or ever will. It just will never happen. So with that in mind, we need to be clear about how we impact one another, right? Two opposing things can both be right. It depends on perspective, context, or interpretation, right? And that's how we, I think, hit some of the challenges that we have. And I'm going to stop talking soon and facilitate a discussion about what those boundaries are that Halen asked about. And what I mean by this is, going back to why I shared the context of the JPA. In that dual hat thing that you have on when you're a JPA board member, you have a fiduciary duty to do what's in the best interest of the pool to ensure that there is a pool to support the members long-term sustainability, right, is what we're looking at. And so when a JPA comes to, hypothetically, when a JPA comes to a member and says, hey, we're concerned about X, right? And they express that concern in various ways or in various contexts. That expression can absolutely be correct because their job is the long-term sustainability of the pool. Can a member themselves say, pick any city you can think of and say, well, wait a minute, there was no foundation in what was being alleged against us. It was never factually supported, right, and so forth. And so I don't see why we're having this discussion kind of a thing. Can that also be true? Yes, absolutely. Facts are the facts, right? In the good old lawyering days of mine as an employment lawyer back in the 90s, I will share with you that all we could say is, we bring in the clients the best we can. First, I was a plaintiff's lawyer suing everybody in LA. And then I was a defense lawyer. And so the facts take us where they take us. There's not a ton we can do about that. The facts are the facts. But there are two opposing things that can be true, and a JPA can become concerned about a member and introduce potential consequences to that member, even though the member can be right about their own facts related to a situation. Any question, comments, pushback, or anything on that? That would be a good time. Steve?
I mean, are you trying to defend JPA's decisions?
No,
Okay, I'm just trying to,
not at all.
okay.
Not at all. I'm just illuminating where we are at times with a member, hypothetically, with a member and a JPA, right? And I saw it a lot. I was Director of Litigation Management for several JPAs. So I held the purse strings for a lot of cities, over 200 cities in California. And sometimes they're at odds, right? And we just need to be aware of the context for it so that we then can adopt a scope of the boundaries we're going to talk about in a minute that makes sense to address, right, the concern that has been raised occupy that JPA?
I guess I'm just trying to get clarity on, is this session here specific to a member of council or what's been going on, or basically,
Why are we hearing this?
what?
Why are we hearing all this?
Yeah.
For a simple
Because of
reason.
the-
Go ahead,
Yeah,
finish your
well,
thought.
I was wondering if it's because I'm new, or we're revisiting, or we've gotten a complaint, or from staff, or I've done some, like, I wanted to clarify that all in the open.
All right,
Because I know there's stuff.
let's just put it out there now, because it's on camera.
Yeah.
This is all about you, Halen.
I was wondering, I was like, what did I do?
This is not, no, we are
It
aligning
is not about
paradigms.
you.
Okay, I just want to.
I'm gonna look at the camera
It's the
and say,
collective.
it is not about Halen.
Was
It
there-
is
There's
not.
sarcasm
all right?
that can be misinterpreted.
Yes,
Was
yes,
that
that's
a-
why I looked at the camera and clarified that. Hopefully that part's not edited
When
out.
you've been using the word member, you've been talking about a city,
Yes.
not a person.
No, member city.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's it.
I wanted to
Those are the
clarify
members.
that.
Yeah, that, when he says member, he means
Yeah.
a member of the organization,
Right, so
not
the
a
city-
member of the city council.
Yeah, let's be clear about that. JPAs have members. Members are
Thank you.
public entities. That's a member, a public entity. And to answer your question directly, this is not directed at any one person.
Okay.
This is directed at, hey, how can we align our paradigms to do two things? One, work most effectively with our executive leadership team. We want to make sure we know those, the ideal relationship there and the scope of that. And two, to understand the impact of not doing that, the climate it creates, and the concerns that can create for the JPA you belong to. Years ago, I'll get to you, Mary Ann Dender Bruce, years ago in a pool, this is all a matter of public record, even though I won't name the city, one of our Bay Area pools that we were running, and we use the word pool and JPA synonymously, right? A risk-sharing pool and a joint powers authority. Was a bad player, this one member, and it was a very political city in the Bay Area, and they had 9 council members, right? And the fire department, you know, knew that they had 3, police department knew that they had 3, and the other 3 were just kind of at large, if you will. And it just wouldn't listen, wouldn't take the risk management advice, et cetera, so they were expelled. That is the worst case scenario. And no one is certainly talking about that, if we get more specific, with the city of Malibu. That's not the case. So I don't want anyone to think or interpret, right, later on that somehow we're creating a risk where we're going to lose our JPA membership, because that's not what's happening. I don't want anyone interpreting that way. Yeah.
I
Very
was
good.
just kind of reiterate that in a different way, that it is prudent in risk management to make sure that there is a check-in and that there is a good foundation and everybody understands that there's a positive way to govern, and to make sure that your risk management is done properly. You check in and provide those tools and information to each member agency so that they can do it.
Very well stated. I'm sorry I stepped over you there on the end there. Your time in the JPA world has served you well. Yeah, it is. That's exactly it, right? There are things that we can all engage in as best practices in a risk management context that benefit us. They benefit the city of Malibu, and they work, right? Bruce, you had your hand up.
Yeah, this is, you know, I wasn't sure when I came in here what we're going to be doing. I thought it was going to be like a very general training type exercise. You know, the elephant in the room is that we have closed sessions. We know of things that are not publicly discussed, and we're not able to or allowed to
Correct.
publicly discuss them. So we're not. You are aware of some things that occur in closed session because you have conversations with other participants in our closed session proceedings, and they're not under a constraint that they're not allowed to discuss it with you, even though we are. There's a subtext in some of this today. Some of it's very general, some of it's very there's a subtext, and there's a very thin analogy or metaphor going on. And I need to understand how much we can talk in this public session about what you're telling us, or how much we have to play the game of just being generalized, because it's very awkward.
Yeah, I think we need to speak in hypotheticals here for you as a governance team, just because we don't want to disclose things that went on in a closed session.
Well,
right?
the hypotheticals are so close that they're all but saying words. I mean, all but saying names and ideas. I mean, to me, you need to be very general, you need to be very specific. It's kind of a game to go in the middle.
But, so just to play off that, I mean, I think that comes back to kind of your paradigm conversation. That when you think that your paradigm is everybody's paradigm, and then also, we're not unique. Other city council, I mean, you can just pick up a paper and you can look throughout California
Absolutely.
and you can look throughout the United States. Very similar things are happening across all levels of government in the United States right now. So whether it's a specific thing that's happening here, there, everywhere else, there's a lot of dynamic change in how governance is occurring throughout levels of government.
And
So
if we're-
making sure that we're being positive and that we're not falling victim and causing harm and not being able to effectively govern our particular jurisdiction is pointing out things that have derailed other places. We
No,
want to make sure we're doing
And if that governance, those other governance teams we're referring to where we open the paper are in California, I mean, they, like us, need to make sure they're complying with the Brown Act, right? And Trevor, are you doing the training this afternoon on Brown Act, right? And other such things. It'll be a good refresher. I know some of you know it frontward, backward. Some of you know it very well. Bruce, I know you know the Brown Act. But it is a context for transparency that reminds us that people do not yield their sovereignty to the bodies that govern them and lead those places, right? Whatever that jurisdiction is. They don't yield it. They demand on remaining informed, right? And so what is it that we're going to build? A structure called the Ralph M. Brown Act that says, you know, no secret ballots, meetings must be held within the jurisdiction, 72 hours notice, any materials you get to see to make a fully informed vote, the public gets to see. Right? I'm not trying to circumvent that train. But that's the structure. Everybody has a unique paradigm, but we cannot project that paradigm as if it is the right way in any given situation, I think is your point, Marion, right? So, Doug?
Yeah, I just want to put something in here because I think, I don't know if you skipped over it or you're going to get to it in a few minutes, but with my background in banking and also in insurance, one of the things that we always run into is risk management and then calculating the amount of risk, usually dollar amounts, that certain instances imply. And I think I had this conversation with you where I was talking about in banking, there are profiles that if you get a large enough body of a transaction, you're going to get X amount of loss. And I always had to explain this when I was in consulting, allowance for loan loss for banks, and these are even major banks. People would say, oh, that's not a bad loan, that's money good. We're never going to lose money on that guy. But when you look at, say, 100 loans that look just like that, and you look back and say 5 years ago, if they were in this profile, what was the loss record on that? The answer is staggering. And I'll give you an example from the group, and which is this, because a lot of bankers would realize that we're talking about their portfolio. If you have an industrial building that has a negative cash flow, in other words, the income is less than the expenses, what's the probability of loss? You go, oh, we're never going to lose money on that. But the answer is, for most banks, it's somewhere between 12% to 20% of the balance of those loans that have that profile today will be lost money over 5 years. And when you put it that way and you look back on it, you go, all right, we're looking at profiles. And in our insurance business that we had, which was liability, workers' comp, fire prevention, we started looking at these profiles. What are the common profiles of our losses? And that's the ones we want to focus on for loss prevention. And I think that's where, as you were talking about examples and so forth, the characteristics of these actions usually result over time, not necessarily every time, but over time, in a certain amount of loss. And in the insurance business, that's how you set your loss profile.
Very good. Thank you for that. I found that very educational.
I'll send you an invoice.
This is very clearly a situation where I believe, now, people in the room may disagree with me, people viewing this later may disagree with me, but I've worked with a lot of councils, right, a lot of them, all in California. My work in other states is usually related to higher education, but in California, I work with local government quite a bit. By measure, by contrast, this is anecdotal, right? This is not empirical data. I think as a governance team, the way you conduct yourselves in your meetings, your preparation at the various levels, some of you are like, you've consumed every note in that staff report, every letter, every suggestion, et cetera, every support document. As far as governance teams go, I think you're doing just fine. Okay, I don't think that anyone can criticize you for, you know, the way you conduct yourselves. I think your code of conduct was thoughtful enough to help us understand the guidelines and the parameters that we can all process and create a collective paradigm now for how we're going to conduct ourselves. When I first started working with you, that was a concern that had been planted in my paradigm to be mindful of, right? They don't get along as well as they should. I think the persons who were sharing that, I think we're living a little bit in the past, right, based on that, but that's certainly not the case now. The challenge you have, I don't believe is in the governance part of you when you're together, right? It's the behaviors that occur that are contributing to a climate that isn't ideal for employees in the city of Malibu. Now, there's nothing I'm saying about that or referring to, Bruce, I'm looking at you when I say this, where you are crossing the line of legality. Even the lane, the proverbial lane of a council member, right? But it is perhaps the quantity of time you are consuming from leadership in the city of Malibu. You are by far on that top 5% of council members who demand a lot of time from their leadership team. There are some council members, you know, at the other end of the spectrum. And when we had binders for our staff report, for our agendas, right? It was always disheartening for me as an elected official myself formerly to see a colleague walk in with their binder, you know how they're sealed up with paper, you know, just a sealed band around it, if you will. To see that council member, that other elected official, school board member, take that bind and tear it for the first time as they're sitting on the dais, right, to conduct our work.
So, you know, it's interesting because this follows up on a lunch meeting I had with somebody a couple days ago. We're both a small town and a major destination. And we've got a very active, the residents are very active.
Yes.
And they're very demanding on us, I suspect, more on a one-on-one basis than many other places.
Is that true for the rest of you as
Yes.
well? They're demanding on you, Steve? Doug? Yeah.
Right, and this is the point. So I was at lunch with a person who's involved in the building arena, and he was talking about how almost everywhere else is much more automated than we are. And here it's very one-on-one. And I said, well, you know, I actually think our residents appreciate the one-on-one. And how many places are you talking about that are our size? And he identified one that he thought was our size. And said, no, that's an unincorporated part of a county, so that's actually, you know, the area you're in might be small, but you're dealing with the county. And he said, oh, I really can't think of one then. And I didn't say this, but I wanted to say, well, you know, and you probably wouldn't be sitting with a council member from the city of Los Angeles to express your concerns. Here I am having lunch with you. So, you know, we are in a small town. Our residents are very much active in our governance. We are very active in the governance. And the fact that we interact a lot with our management isn't because we're more demanding than they are, like, say, in Los Angeles. It's because we're in a small community. And, you know, yes, that's going to mean there's going to be more interaction than you would expect in most places. But, I mean, I wonder, what's your experience in other 10,000, 5,000 resident towns?
I'm going to give you an answer you'll understand. It depends. So the reality is, right, smaller towns are what I believe are the purest form of democracy, because you have access to your people, your representative government, right? Even state assembly, state senators in California, what is the percentage of people that actually have access to them directly? Whereas here, in any other small town, anywhere, not just California, I see you at the grocery store, at a restaurant, at the park, at the beach, at a laundromat maybe, right? And here I am. Hey, so what's going on? You know, is that skate park, you know, ever gonna go in over here? Because, you know, my kids are da-da-da-da-da-da, right? And then they have access to you. To me, that's an amazing thing. And I applaud to me that you represent, I applaud you because you represent to me that purest form of democracy, right? And without casting their own vote, they feel like, hey, I'm gonna help you cast your vote, right, on this particular issue. So yeah, small towns definitely require this discussion more than medium and large cities. No question, no question. But we still have to have this discussion because of the impact it has on the leadership of the city, on the employees. It's the cumulative effect of a half hour with you, 20 minutes with you, an hour with you, 30 minutes with you, and an hour with you on a regular basis to our executive, you know, in charge and the executive team in charge. Add that up, right, in a week, and what does that look like? You've taken away 2.5 days, right, we'll say, of a person's workday over a period of 1 week's time. It is really handcuffing to people at an executive level for that to happen. So your point is well taken. I'm not going to have this discussion with the City Council of Los Angeles or even Santa Monica, right? But we are having it here, and it's for a reason and a purpose to ensure that we are being the best version of us that we can be. And understand with self-awareness and self-regulation, which we're about to cover, what we can do. What's your response to
Well,
that?
just, you know, on the other side of it though, is like, you know, this is a part-time job that's all but volunteer.
Yes.
But you'd be amazed at how much time we spend on a weekly, when you say that the cumulative 20 minutes here, hour here, we have that same accumulation with our residents. I spend 20, 30 hours a week on this part-time volunteer position, interacting with people who I'm then funneling to the management what I'm hearing and what they're looking for.
So the question...
And I can cut that off, but...
No, you're 20 to 30 hours a week? That's what you signed up for. That's this job in Malibu.
That's
position.
separate from preparing for things.
No, that's right. But that's part of the package of being Vice Mayor Bruce Silverstein, right, for Malibu.
Right, and my point is, and that's part of the package of signing up to work for the city of Malibu too.
That's where we may differ on our paradigms. That's Bruce's paradigm
Yes.
talking, right? Not, I think, Jerry's paradigm, or if I could put one out there in the world that I see, a sort of best practice paradigm in small towns, right? There's the challenge right there. Halen, what were you going to say?
Yes, I think so because I'm new, I have a different perspective, right? So there's an election, we get elected by residents, we are residents, so we also see things from that side of the street, which is, we run for a reason. And that reason is to live in a city that we have expectations from. And, you know, whether that's the road or safety or dark sky ordinance. So we have our goals or our perspectives, paradigms.
Yeah.
And then I think that the residents are very, very demanding because I don't mind that, right? I am one of those people. So therefore, we're interfacing with residents. So I think of ourselves as sort of a buffer, I hope, between us as council, because they elected us. They took time to get to know who I am. I'm a mother, I'm a surfer, whatever. So we have a response, this is my paradigm, a responsibility to those people. I think that those people, which I was, don't realize that there's a very separate entity, which is the city staff. Then we have the council that are elected, but they are not elected. So I think in the city, there is a moment that there needs to be some education around how much this council can do, how much I can do with them, and how much they can actually do. Because I think to manage the expectations of the residents, which are really high, right? And if you think about why they're high, it makes sense to me. I have high expectations of myself, I have high expectations of my city, of the government here, and that's just the way I am personally.
Yeah.
So I think that we will keep running up into this issue until residents understand where those parameters are. Where I have to say all the time, that's not me. That's not something, and they go, why? I elected you. And I go, I'm not a strong mayor. I don't
That's
even know,
yeah.
I'm not the city manager.
Well, let me get to 2 points before I lose them. I'm at the stage of life where if I don't do it now, they're gone,
Totally.
right? So 2 points here. One is, you are in a transitional phase in your public service career right now. It's an early phase, right? And it'll be as long as hopefully you want it to be. But the transition is going from buddy to boss, right? It's like when you're a coworker
Buddy to
and you
boss
get
to who?
promoted. Exactly. It's like when you're a coworker and you get promoted to manager. You have to create certain buffers that didn't exist before when you were buddy with this person who you worked with. Now you're residents, to finish the analogy here, you're residents, you're activists, you're involved, right, with these folks, and then you get elected, right? And so earlier I used the example with Mary Ann of JPA board member at times, takes it off, City of Malibu, right, fiduciary now, what's in our best interest, et cetera. You have to do the same thing. There are moments in time when you are resident Halen Conrad, right? And then there are the times when you put on your hat and you are a member of a governance team that is charged with setting a vision, ensuring that vision is being executed by city staff, et cetera, right? We still haven't talked about the boundaries for what that is, but we're going to get there here. And so you have to separate yourself at times. Accessibility, you don't have to separate that. We want them to reach out to you. I love that they can reach out to you. But what we need to figure out is how you can meet their needs by saying what you said. Hey, this isn't a strong mayor form of government. This is a council manager form of government. And so I am not boots on the ground, doing the public works responsibilities or the building compliance or anything else. And so here's what you do if you need help with that, and you send them to where they're supposed to go, right? Or you share with them, you know what, and this is okay as a council member, resident Bruce, I am right with you on that. I don't know why it's so difficult to get one of these permits for a block party, and I went through that frustration myself for several years, and I finally decided, you know what, I'm just going to follow the process and plan 6 months in advance now for this to happen, right? But I feel you, and you can be empathic, validating, all those things. And those are great things for us to do. It is not patronizing and condescending unless we make it so, right? It is genuine expression as an elected official that it's okay to be frustrated. I think anyone in your shoes, Mary Ann, would be frustrated with what you're experiencing in our schedule for cleaning up that park in your neighborhood, right? We do have limitations, and so I'm sorry you feel that way. And sometimes that's all you can do, Halen, which is hard, because you want to be a get-it-done gal. You do, and you want to be a get-it-done guy, Steve, right? And you want these things to happen, and you want to, but we can't. That's not who you are, that is not your scope, that just isn't.
So I have a question, but I actually agree with all that, but then again, that's just your paradigm that you're telling us right now. I happen to agree with that paradigm, but we could all actually disagree with that.
You absolutely could.
Because you said I come from a legal background.
Yeah.
Because that's not a legal requirement of governance. That's just one paradigm of what makes sense.
Here's the challenge with the compliance component of what you're referring to. That's not what the law says I need to be doing. If you choose to be right, rather than do something that is the right thing for our situation based on the collective paradigm, that's problematic.
I'm saying we could have a collective paradigm that's different than the one you're expressing. We could. I'm not saying we do. But I have a question. Are we? I think it's fair to ask right now, because we have a new governance team at the senior level to go through.
Are you ready?
Are you experiencing the things that he's generically talking about right now from us? Because it's important for us to understand that. If you are.
Arrived in emails constantly that aren't priorities. But, we've been, but-
Emails from us?
Huh?
Emails from us or
Or
from the residents?
residents, I think council specific.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
It's both. Not everybody.
It is
Do
both.
you feel that you, do you feel that you can't say this
It's not
is
everybody, it's just some. It's
when it
just-
occurs? Do you feel like you can't tell whoever it is of us?
Oh, no, I pick up the phone. Someone here will tell you that I will be like, I'm very sorry, but we are swamped over here right now. Cannot deal with this right now. And, we'll put it on the list. Thank you very much. Have a great day. I don't have a problem with that. But I live here. I know what everybody's like. So you can see the name of whoever it is that's sending their nasty gram of the day. And you're like, okay, calm down. But, it's a different thing. I live here. I know how to manage some of the folks around here. Because I've lived with them for so long, and I know them, and I take their matters seriously. But at the moment, if we're working on priority for you all, for the city, I have to tell them, can you give me some time, and we'll get back to you, by the end of the week. So I think it's up to us, just as you're telling them they have to, push back on some of the folks that they get. We have to do that too. I know personally, I don't have a problem. I'm sure you all receive my phone calls or, my emails like, got it, on it, you'll hear back from me. But I can't say that's how everyone else has felt beforehand, what I feel.
I can.
Yeah, well, listen, I don't want to talk about, I'm still up right now. Richard, are you getting contacted by any of us, without naming any names, are you getting contacted by any of us and we're
So,
imposing on you?
anytime a request comes to Candace, not every time, but most of the time, if there's something that Candace thinks we should act upon, I'm quickly included, which is great. That's the way it should work.
Yeah, we work really well together. We'll knock it out, on a two-person.
But you're not answering the question. The question is the city council dating you, everybody, right? With all this communication that's making your life miserable?
No.
Okay.
No, I would say no, but I will say there is a higher volume of requests in Malibu than the other cities I work for.
Go back
By
to what Bruce said.
council or by residents?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to parcel it out.
Yeah, I
I would
agree.
very much appreciate personally, just the transparency so that I know, because this is my first gig, and you've been doing this longer than I have, and I don't mind whatever the cameras see, but so that I know, I would like to, we know that residents, that's different, but from council, day to day, I always CC the two of you together. I was trained to do that by Mr. Tony, if I have something, I CC Alexis, right? And I also didn't always expect responses, but it was me putting something out there. I can't even think of what the last email I sent to you guys was, but is it too much for me, let's say? Which I don't mind, I need to know.
Well, I
just
don't
don't
know that we-
understand what all of this
That we need to
is
be
if we don't get
specific,
specific.
right? Other than speaking generalities, which is, yes,
Do we have a
you are.
quotient? Do we have a council to management, day-to-day, 3 emails a day? Do I get to know what is too much and what is not too much?
Yes.
Do I have?
Let's go through these two things
Okay.
right here, and then that's what we're gonna talk
Great.
about for the rest of our time.
Well,
Okay?
Well, you know-
That's my paradigm, I'll throw on the table, my paradigm is I can reach out to the city manager every time and any time I feel the need to do so. And the city manager is free to say, no time to deal with this isn't on my radar, or good point, let's deal with it. I don't do that with others. If I do it, it's on a very rare occasion.
Others, you mean directors or?
Correct. And that's what I like to so I'm trying to, and to me, that's the way, to me, my paradigm, the city manager then filters those things. When it says that I get a lot of requests, well, that's because the city manager's determined, this is something that is worth doing, because if it's not, the request wouldn't be passed down. I want to understand, who on the staff, if anybody, are we imposing on, if anybody, today, now, not 2 years ago,
Right.
not a
Current.
year ago even.
Only current.
Under our current management, who, if anyone, are we imposing on? Because I suspect it would be Candace, because that makes sense, that's the city manager. And again, she has the power easily to deflect it or address it.
To use a Reagan term, it's trickled down.
But it should only
Right,
trickle
impact.
down, it only trickles down if it gets through the filter.
So that, I do want to cover this, because this will impact our discussion without putting any more burden on you to answer that. But if you have something to say, I feel like I cut you off.
I mean,
I'm
we're
almost like a
transparent.
I'm like a traffic control cop, like, so if something comes in and it has to do with the beaches and somebody's upset about that, it's like, okay, it goes, we used to have this department at the State Department for, incoming, calls that you had to deal with. These people all sat in a room and they literally just had headphones on and they just dealt with incoming.
It's like a triage, right?
Yes.
Where
and,
needs to
and
go.
like, it was amazing. They would just, and it was like, okay, they had all this gear and then they would like a new rotation of people come in with their headgear, handling all this incoming and then directing it into whatever, federal office it needed to go to. I was fascinated by it. But it's pretty much like the same thing. And I find the days are really full because there's a lot of incoming. It goes to the right director about which department, how do we respond to this? Let's get this done. All of that. It's a lot of that.
Except
But-
mine's,
Yeah, and then but the other part that takes away from it, because it's a lot, because it's a rebuilding and recovery period, is that there's some serious long-range issues that the city is looking at, has to deal with. We're looking at trying to get more resources and things like that. So, all of this takes away from making the big things happen. So you end up being a reactionary organization as opposed to an organization that is, resilient and sustainable. And that's the only thing that, and I haven't been here that long, but, as someone who's worked at a lot of different organizations, and I think understanding has a lot to do, but that we are very reactionary, and I know folks are very right? So, but that's what happens.
I really appreciate Helen's question of, let's parse this. So, look, focus only on city council members, not on the residents, not on anyone else, just the city council members. And let's focus not on Candace, just for the moment, not on the city manager. Are the city council members making demands on the staff? Because the city manager has the capacity to determine if the demand is on the city manager, whether it's an appropriate demand to pass on to a staff member or not.
Let's eliminate making demands and use the expression, is the council
Reaching out to them even.
impacting adversely the staff or anyone else by their communication, by reaching out, or anything else?
I do want to parse out from statements on the dais, statements to the public, statements that might be made at the grocery
yeah.
store.
I'm not talking about any of those.
Direct
Yeah.
communication between a city council member and someone that's subordinate to the city manager. Full stop.
Yeah, Richard, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I think this is a great discussion because it's important to have. Periodically, we all get caught up in the day-to-day. It's really important to consider when you establish priorities, you're establishing limits, right? So if something is a priority, you're going to spend the time that you have addressing it. And for an organization this size, we can't have as many priorities as a larger organization inherently because we have fewer personnel to manage. So let's say we have 10 priorities. As we receive new requests, if they align with those priorities, we can try to make it happen. But if it's something brand new that requires a unique set of analysis, so say financial considerations or workload considerations or timing considerations, it requires pausing, stepping back, looking at the 10, and either saying, okay, we need to drop one of the 10, or we need to create a new project.
I totally appreciate that, but that can come from a city council meeting,
Right,
and
yeah.
we can address that. My specific question is, are city council members directly interacting, not from the dais, but on a daily basis during working hours or off working hours with members of the staff that's causing any issues? Are those communications occurring? I know when I communicate with someone other than the city manager, and I know how infrequent it is. I know for me. I don't know for others. And as I'm trying to understand without naming names, are we interacting with staff members in a way that's putting pressure on them? Because I don't know that we are. And that's what's
I think,
making
yeah, but I think the narrative of interacting is the challenge.
No, this is a good time.
No, but that's what you're
because
suggesting, that we're kind
Okay,
of.
wait, stop. We're gonna go one at a time. Could you please call on each council member to have
But I'd like
their,
an
Thank you,
answer to the
Madam
question,
Mayor.
not.
I
So, and we're not
understand
gonna
that,
not
but
answer
it's-
the question, but
We're not
I just.
answering it, that's the problem.
But we're not going to not answer it, we're going to answer
but
it.
just
okay?
answer it. It's a no.
So here's what I want to say before I call on Madam Mayor and then Halen, Councilmember Halen, if I'm going to go that
Oh,
way.
that's okay.
And that is, are we interacting with the staff in a way that's burdensome or whatever else? I think that doesn't frame the narrative completely the way it should, right?
It's a piece of it. I'm just trying to figure out whether that piece
Okay.
exists or doesn't
Madam Mayor.
exist.
so what I was gonna say is that when you're a council member, you hold a different level of response that the staff is gonna get. This is what I discovered as being a council. When I ask something, it automatically has a certain weight and a certain priority to the staff. There's an expectation that I have to answer this question, I have to resolve this
Even if you
issue.
didn't intend that.
Exactly. Just because the fact that I sit as a council member, I'm on a hierarchy of, I gotta respond to this in some way, shape, or form, or I've gotta deal with this in some way, shape, or form.
Because you're the ultimate boss's boss.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So automatically, me asking a question is going to be a paradigm that the city manager and then by extension, those people who are in that management level have to be like, okay, how am I going to, what am I gonna give up? And then it gets to a point where it's like, okay, we're so far off the tracks, we're not staying on. You know, and other things. These fires have shifted the attention and it has kept the city from moving forward in a meaningful way, technology-wise. Other things that we need to be doing as a city to move us forward every single day. So those are the two things.
Halen, Steve.
Again, we still haven't had an answer to the question, all right? Which I think we deserve. That has been the issue. Just hang on, okay? And look, this is not easy on any of us, all right? I mean, I've been doing this now for 8 years. This is my last 4, all right? And you get calls, and as Bruce said earlier, our residents are active. They do not, they're active and they got money. And they're not used to taking no for an answer, all right? Now, I get calls all day long, all right? And what I try and do is balance out the process that says some of the calls I get, I'll try and answer for them, right? I'll say, well, you know, we're working on this, or this is coming down the line, it's gonna show up on the city council agenda, and there are other things which, and I try to make the best decisions I can, where I know I can't go any place with this thing, right? And so you try and just say, hey, look, it's something we gotta put on pause, but I'll tell you, when I tell them to put on pause, okay, they say, screw it, I'm gonna call the city manager, right? I mean, all we're doing is taking some of that stuff that, you know, we have not been able to solve on our own, and they push it up the pipeline. Because they're looking for an answer, and they want an answer, and they're gonna keep pushing until they get one. But I do want to try and get an answer to the question we've been asking now for the last 15 minutes. Are we overburdening the staff with requests? Seems to me to be a valid question.
That's to the staff.
Yeah.
So Halen's comment, and then I think we should take a break because you've been sitting for an hour and a half.
Well, I'm finding this really enriching,
Yeah.
personally.
Good,
Because
so-
I really need to get to the bottom of this. For us to have a healthy, copacetic relationship moving forward with a new city manager, I need to really understand, without hurt feelings or anything like that, the rules of engagement, right? So if we're gonna engage, I'd like to know the rules of engagement, because when I get a resident that's emailing me, my car got towed yesterday, or texts me, all of these texts, and I go, I don't deal with the tow truck company. I don't know how to help you except this is what I believe you should do. Email the city. Email the council. We can't, and then I explain the Brown Act. And I say, there's the city manager, there's the assistant, there's the tow truck company. After that, it's out of my hands, but I'm trying to play as a buffer. So if I can solve something before it gets to staff, I really truly try to do that. But there's a lot of things that I don't have control of. Now that being said, Mary Ann's point, we're constantly triaging. And your point, we are very reactionary. And so this is unsustainable. In my opinion, it is an unsustainable program that we're running. And you shouldn't be the lady with the headset, and neither should the city manager who's coming on that's going, okay, safety, okay, program. So there has to be maybe some sort of where we look into how, in strategic work plan, which is coming up, how to help answer that, because this is not the last disaster. Our residents are not going away, nor should they. They pay a lot in tax, and they pay a lot of price to live here, both economically and philosophically, to be burning down over and over and over again. But I would love for us to come up with something where residents aren't as angry, council's not getting thrown in the bus, because I believe in the five of us. I got to know each one of them very personally, and I think we're all trying to adhere to a process. And I got to know the staff's amazing. So there are these hiccups that we need to really figure out.
And just so we're clear, I do think we should take a quick break.
Without getting
This is about us trying to find the right balance, you're all saying the same thing, so that we are not burdening staff, because the climate does seem to be an issue, the culture, when I say that, right, of the city of Malibu and our ability to attract, mostly to retain people, which we have a lot of vacancies presently, right, in the city. So let's take a break. Let's go get across the hall, biological break, fill your coffee, do whatever, and then Steve, Council Member Steve, we will come back and answer that question.
I would appreciate it.
All right. All right. I don't know.
No, that's your camera.
I know it's the city's camera, but is the city recording?
Yeah, do we need
Okay.
Trevor in the room before we start?
No, you can start with
Okay, great, thank you.
So we want to reconvene with the answer to several of you have asked, and Steve has insisted on, which is a good thing, Steve. So what about this, Candace?
So, no, I do not feel that, calling the directors directly. I do feel that there are, and I have heard that some of our commission members are calling directors. And
Good to know.
therein, I do believe there needs to be training for those commissioners, this type of training for them to know that that is not appropriate.
Okay.
So that's where that's coming from.
Different
Helen and then Madam Mayor.
Is there a way, without being here right now, I mean, I think you're right. So the commissioner's training is today, correct?
That's Brown Act training.
There's
Oh.
commissioner training too. Yep.
Yeah, so let's totally bring that up. Okay, great.
Well, the other thing, look, we appoint the commissioners. So if you've got a problem with somebody, yell, all right? I mean, I've got the ability to call my commissioner and say,
That's true.
stop doing what the hell you're doing.
Let
And
us-
I've got no problem doing it, but you gotta let me know.
And that's the thing, sometimes we don't know. And it
Right.
takes a while to bubble up, we'll hear about it,
Right.
But.
Just, I've been in management long enough
Mary
to
Ann?
understand that you gotta say no to some people, all right? And that's part of the job.
Madam Mayor.
Well, I think that's something that we need to be clear on also, is it's okay, that we are a council that can hear no, and that we are accepting to that. And I don't know that we have necessarily projected that as a council, that we are open to hearing both positive and negative feedback on how our actions are impacting this now.
We've actually said that multiple times at our strategic planning sessions.
Right.
When we've had the senior staff here in the room with us, we've made that clear. Whether they can get it, whether they accept it or not, is another question.
But I think that
we've
goes
made it
back to
clear.
my previous comment that as a council member, there is just a certain a way that staff interacts with those council members just by sheer fact of that title.
Yeah,
that
no,
title can interfere with getting that constructive feedback to us also.
And Bruce made the point also, right, when it comes to, for example, when you're in your governance team mode on the dais and you're doing your work of the people, there are comments you make that somebody in the city, an employee in the city, may like, oh, the vice mayor said this, I better jump on this. When that's not your intent or your directive in any way, it was just something you shared, and they took that initiative, they interpreted that way through their paradigm or whatever they did, right? That part we're not talking about here. And if they choose to do that of their own volition and take it that way, you know, then it'll be Richard who says, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Because, and then we can make the corrective measures that need to be made with a limited time.
So again, though, without naming any names, it would be helpful to know the specific types of actions that are occurring, if any, that are causing either the city manager or the junior staff to the city manager to take on responsibilities that they feel are distracting them from the job that they're supposed to be doing. Because I'd like to understand that. That seems to be
I agree.
the general thing that you're alluding to. We've now established it's not by reaching out to individuals and giving them direction or asking them to do things. I'd like to know what are the things we're doing, whoever it is, that's causing that additional burden.
Douglas.
I think we're drilling down too soon, too deep on this topic right now. I think, you know, everybody wants to make sure they're not causing a problem. But I think what we're really seeing here is a symptom of what there is a problem. And hopefully that's what you're going to get into. If the problem is we're understaffed, or we haven't made it clear that we don't need an answer now, but let's find out what the problem is.
I think what we're trying to do.
Why beat around the bush? Let's just let's drill right down.
This isn't the problem. This isn't about reaching out to somebody. That's not the problem. That's a symptom of, like, I'll tell you exactly what I just had. Text message from a resident goes, I need my brush cleaner.
Me too.
But my answer is because I know what the answer is. I said, call Station 7, they'll take care of it.
Huh.
As opposed to having to reach out to the staff and get to them. The symptom is, reaching out to the staff. The problem is.
No, we were just told we're not.
Is it the commissioners or whoever? And I'm just making a point. The problem may be we don't know how to handle it, or our commissioner doesn't know how to handle it. And we need to train them so that we solve that problem as opposed to just the symptom. That's all.
Some of the stuff you're not gonna be able to handle. I got 7:30 this morning, I'm getting a phone call. Okay, from residents that what the Sam L, the city council doing, stuff these guys say you're gonna get finished, you're not getting finished. Okay, so I gotta talk to this person, right? You gotta sit back and say, look, this process, it takes time. And I don't know after I finish the conversation with them whether they said, okay, Steve, I agree with you, or they say, healthy, see, I gotta talk to somebody who's got more power than me. I'm gonna call Bruce or somebody else.
All right, Halen, and then I want to make a
Sorry.
point, just on a
Yes.
couple slides, and then we can continue the dialogue, okay?
I'm having this issue too with residents, the phone calls, especially with brush clearance, because there's a need for it with a deadline, we don't have any information, what's happening with the hillside. I'm like, I don't know who owns your hillside, call those people. And I haven't even brought this up to you guys because to me, I'm always trying to flag what to bring to you guys.
I just made an announcement, it was in the newsletter that we put out, I made an announcement from the state about brush cleaner, where you call.
It's not there, it's,
But for you, you should just have that, it's in the newsletter from last.
I think it's more about
And
other
just-
lands.
Well, but if you're saying the city is calling you about the utilities, here, this is the email, but I think what we're trying to do is push out more information, that's why I started doing the newsletter, so that people had more information that they could learn about it and the contact where to call themselves. So I think the more we're able to do that, the better.
And I think that there is this kind of culture in the city with the residents, that they want everything to be done for them. And I think that they look to us as giving them simple answers, which I don't always have. And then I am like, oh, that's where I think it kind of is this conundrum of how do I get the answers to help the residents, but then it might be clogging their inbox.
So I appreciate that, and I've rethought it. We have 45 minutes left on my time with you. And I really do want to get some of these this boundary discussion in place with you, so we're all on the same page. All this was going to say is simply that, to your point on self-awareness, right? We may not know the impact that our communication, our interaction, whatever it is with a member of the city staff, whether it's this level or below, is going to have, right? We may not be aware. There's two parts of self-awareness. Hi, my name is Bruce Silverstein, and I'm strong at this, I'm strong at that. Not so great at this, and I'm trying to improve that. That's great. That's good self-knowledge, provided it's accurate, right? But then there's the other half of self-awareness for all of us. One that we all need to be working on, and it is, I understand the impact that my behavior is having on the people around me. Right? I understand the impact, and to your point, sometimes we don't realize that because I'm a council member, the mayor, whomever, sending this information along to somebody, I'm just sending it along. That's my intent, right? Council member Conrad sending along this little brush thing that came up to so-and-so. And then if I'm an employee of the city, I'll be honest, I'm like, oh, this council member is doing X, Y, and Z, right? And asking me for this or telling me this, I guess she wants me to deal with this. May not have been your intent.
What if it says just FYI?
Yeah, still, that would be something, it depends on the person, right? But it's nice to say that and give context.
Yeah.
I would do that. But the question is, right, do we understand that? Because I get the collective sense, when it comes to how you're impacting the culture, this is an outsider who has known you for 8 months, and in that time really only interacted with you for maybe a total of 2 or 3 hours in interviews, meetings like this, etc. My sense is you're well thought of people, you're capable, you're talented, right? Individually, you come together in extraordinary ways where people think, hey, Doug, you're an extraordinary individual, you're my council member, right, kind of thing. But as far as the impact on the culture, right, and I don't know how forthcoming the staff could ever be on this. It seems like you come together as extraordinary individuals, and as a council team, when it comes to cultural impact, you become very ordinary, right? You become very impactful without knowing it. I mean, you have people making decisions at times that rationally don't make sense to me, right? Not this council, but other people in reaction to what you're doing, or the commissioners are doing. It could be either one. So my question is, are we just going to keep doing things the way we've done things and expect different results as far as attracting and retaining talent, staff level, executive level, etc.? Are we just going to continue our current level of communication and interaction, or are we going to self-regulate more? Would that be helpful? Bruce?
I would argue that in the 4 years I've been on city council, I think we've been working towards improving what you're discussing. And I think we have made improvement.
Right.
Is there more room for improvement? Of course, there always is. But I think we actually are aware of the issues and are moving towards the right result. There's sometimes we don't agree on what the right result is.
Let's discuss one right now. Emailing our executive team, for example, right? Is there a reasonable amount of email or a time frame for those emails? Because you may say, hey, just because I'm emailing her at midnight, Halen emailing Candace at midnight, doesn't mean I want her to answer at midnight, and I put an FYI on there, right? Just FYI. But does that impact a city leader in a particular way, based on what you said earlier, and I agree with? It can. My experience with cities all over, it can, because of who you are, a member of this governance team. It carries weight. Whether you want it to or not, it carries weight. So with that in mind, what do we think is a reasonable amount of time?
Yeah, I'll answer on that.
Yeah.
I believe text, and the beauty of text and emails is that they go out when you are ready to send them out. They can sit there as long as they need to sit there until they're responded to. You don't need to be cognizant of when you're sending them out at all. Everyone has the liberty to respond to them when they deem appropriate, and they should know, especially when it's an employee relationship, that they're not required to do it during off hours.
Well, see, there's you projecting your paradigm.
I'm agreeing. I understand that.
You're projecting with that, and they should know, right? That's a Bruceism right here that all of you may or may not agree with, right? But I'm saying my experience with employees with that they should know, they don't have to respond, that is not a universal paradigm. And they feel compelled on a Saturday when they get the email to look stuff up, maybe come down here, find something, and then send it back to you by 7 p.m. on Saturday. right? So could we self-regulate
When I say
and
they-
stop ourselves
When I said
from
they should
sending
know, I
these?
mean, they should be educated to the effect that.
That's better.
I didn't mean that, they
Yeah.
innately need to understand it.
Well, and also, I mean, you know, especially in our city, given how emergency prone we are,
Yeah.
and our city leadership is expected to respond when there is an emergency, that means their phones are on 24/7. And, you know, unless they have designated somebody else, that, you know, they have scheduled time off and they've appointed
Yeah.
another person to be in charge, they're getting these messages at 24/7. When do they know not to respond to that particular thing? Because they're technically on duty.
Yeah.
So how is
It's a great
it
point.
that they triage that particular thing? If their phone's ringing it, you know, or their text message or their emails are getting alerts, they have to look at that because that could be an emergency request. So how do they monitor to respond to emergencies, but also triage whether or not that email they're getting at that particular day and time is
Yeah.
Same way I do, I
Something
scan the emails, I decide which ones are important, and which ones aren't.
But at
If the
1
ones that
o'clock in
aren't-
the morning, you're still getting woken up.
Well,
So is that appropriate that that person doesn't get 8 hours of sleep
If you're getting
because
an email,
somebody
if
else's
you're getting
timeline?
something at 1 in the morning, it's usually an emergency or some higher level.
But not if we're sending emails because that happens to be our time clock
Well,
of responding to our emails.
I don't
doing so.
look at my emails at 1 in the morning, trust me.
This is a very, very common workplace issue with regards to where we are in the world right
Yeah.
now. It's how to separate life-work balance. This is not specific to Malibu. We can definitely work on maybe a policy where the staff knows it's not an emergency, you don't have to answer at 1 a.m. I have staff, and they know that, because I'm up all night, and I send them emails, but I say, you don't have to respond. Like, this is just, that there is a, you know, if there's an emergency, I'm gonna guess that people have to wake up in the middle of the night, but that's, like, we're all adults. I don't know why it's,
Let me tell you something.
yeah,
When those emails come in at 12 a.m., I keep my phone on all
Yeah.
24/7 because I am concerned about emergency,
Yeah.
concerned about, you know, what's going on with the road and who's going to
Yeah.
break in somebody's house, all of that. But when I get an email about something that's just random at 12 a.m., it dings in my ear right next to me, and my husband is like, who the hell is that?
Rightfully so.
I have to tell him.
Rightfully
I have
so.
to tell him, you know, I'm sorry, you know, the email, and he was like, and I won't tell you what he said. But, you know, there is a timer that you can put on your emails so that, you know, they go out at 7 a.m., you know, or they, you know, stop going out. Like if it's just a FYI or something, you're not sending that out.
Technology
At all
is
hours
handy.
of the night.
how do you flag all the spam? So I have 2 teenagers.
So that's a different
I
discussion.
wouldn't,
That's
oh no,
just
because the thing is that when I keep my phone on all night, I can't, it's just dinging all night long, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
So there is technology now which maybe we should look
There
into.
is.
What? Yeah,
There is.
on how to, this is
on our
like,
But let's-
phones- on our
let's stay
phones, it's
focused
not-
on one
it's
thing.
not- Our phones are not, it's not necessarily spam, you know, there's 2 phones. My personal phone, I turn this on. This is the city
Yeah.
phone, it stays on.
Okay.
There is technology that we probably don't have that allows you to select what can come through and what can't come through, and allows the sender to determine whether something's an emergency or
It
not.
sounds like way
You're
more
not-
technology
you're not
than I
gonna
know
get
of. right?
residents. I don't know if
My
they're
wife
sending
uses it.
anything.
But here is the point. We're talking, we can't control the residents, right?
Yeah.
Let's do the great John Wooden, another great public servant, 1910 to 2010, right? That's an amazing wisdom. Let's not focus on the things we have control over. He said, don't let the things you cannot do interfere with the things you can do. What can we do? Can we say we will not email city leadership after, you know, a certain time of the day? Are you comfortable with that boundary? Saying, hey, we're not going to email them after 8 p.m.?
I don't
That
email
sounds good
anybody
to me.
after 8.
I'm asleep by
I'm
8:30.
not saying
I'm
stuff.
sleeping.
Look,
Phone call, 8:30? That's
I
nice.
try to by 9:30 to sleep.
So we're talking about contact, not just email. Texting, phone calls, emails, right? Whatever else is out there technology-wise. 8 p.m., can we just say, hey, let's hold on to that until tomorrow, or set it to go out at 7 a.m., something like that, right? So that we are not part of the thing that keeps them awake or upsets the spouse or anything else. Can we commit to that? Mary Ann, you good with that one? Todd? You're on board? And then the weekends. This one's a little harder because things happen on the weekend, but can we say we will only text or email or call if it is a pressing or urgent matter, an emergency, a resident calling us and telling us they saw a Bengal tiger on their hillside, right? Things like that. And are we comfortable with that weekend boundary as well? Bruce, you comfortable with that one?
Sure.
I didn't feel like a firm commitment right there on that one, but I'll take it nonetheless because I love you, man.
I learned a long time ago to go by the words and not by
The tone, whatever else.
But I think your nonverbal cues, you scrolling on your phone while he's talking directly to you.
I was scrolling on my phone to see how often I had communicated with certain people. As
I
well.
understand.
I'm fine with that.
But-
That wasn't me calling you out on that one.
But some people do feel that you are not fully engaged when you are
And
multitasking.
in my paradigm, that's their problem.
We'll talk about that privately, you and I, right? About the impact nonverbal communication has on messaging and how it can undo our verbal, right, in those situations. So, those are nice boundaries to have in these situations. So, not after 8 p.m. Did somebody write that down? Richard, did you get
Wait,
that
is this
down?
policy?
No, we're making commitments, that's all.
Okay.
We're not establishing or adopting a
Just
policy.
wasn't sure if we had to, like, vote
It's-
on it and
It's
then-
not agendized for votes or
Unagendized.
anything else. Yeah, no.
But that being said, should it be something that maybe we update the code of conduct, that is included as a.
That's up to you.
Okay.
I
That's up
think
to
we
you.
need to get the technology.
If
Figure
we,
these things out, and then it's not incumbent on us to think about it.
yeah. So if we don't see a commitment to it, then we should have a discussion about adopting it formally. Right now, it's a commitment from this government, Steve, and I like your answer. I don't email anybody after it. That's a good one, Steve. That's perfect, right? All right, so there's that part of it, right? The weekend limitation, the after 8 p.m. We won't talk about the morning because I understand Candace is up at 4 a.m. every morning anyway. 5, well, I was close. High achievers, right? They're always starting the day early. So there's one element right there. Now let's talk about when it comes to our, just in general, not after hours, because we're committed to after hours not communicating, right? But what about our interactions, emails, FYI emails to staff? Do we feel like we need any limitations or boundaries on those?
Why isn't
I
that being
think-
directed by the
That's right.
the management, the staff that says, look, here's what I want you to do, right? I mean, if I go, if somebody tells you, if somebody has a request, it's going to take you an hour to fill out, talk to us before you fill it out. Talk to your supervisor, right? I mean, doesn't it have to sort of control some of this stuff?
Before we get to Halen,
Yeah.
should we, I mean, that's one person talking, right, out of our governance team, that should this be going the other way and us educating managers, I doubt it's anyone frontline, non-supervisory we're contacting, is it?
Well, I
It's usually a
agree.
manager.
I just want to get a clarifying question with that, because I agree. I think what I do is I try to CC you guys, the executive team, and then you guys can determine if it's worth the staff's time or anything like that. I also don't understand this is very open-ended, there's no quotient, right? There's no idea of a number. Like, I would like to hear staff tell us, 10 is too many, 5 is just right.
That was
2
our
is-
next topic.
Okay, great. So I don't know if I
Yeah.
can answer your question until I get more feedback from that.
On whether we should be, have limitations on reaching out to staff?
I think
or-
having their feedback to us, because we're the ones that you're questioning, because obviously we've done something wrong or incorrect.
I don't
So
know that
would
there's
just
something
need to-
wrong. We're just
whatever
looking at
it is,
best practices
Here for
here
best
to
practices,
create this
let's hear
culture.
from that side. to hear-
So the first
Sure.
question of, do we feel like as, the executive staff of the employees here, that we can effectively educate them to not necessarily jump at the beck and call of council members and jump into work. Because are some employees with their paradigm going to be, no way. If Doug reaches out to me, I'm doing it.
But then we CC you guys, and there has to be some way.
And then you create work for them to have to say, hey, don't do that.
This is a.
Don't listen to Halen, right?
Kind of, yeah, this is what I mean.
I picked up the phone and called and said, that's too much.
That's right,
We're in
which I
the middle-
appreciate.
We're in the middle of like
The budget.
Like, I'm sorry, but you know, we can't do it this way, so please don't say.
That would be awesome if you did more of that, I think.
But then that's
You know,
taking away from her management of the staff and the goals of the city. If she's constantly.
The cumulative effect.
Right.
You're just one council member. And then you got Steve who calls every 10 minutes, you know. That is not accurate, I made that up, all right? And so forth. It's a cumulative effect of each of you generating work for them, right? Doug, you had your hand up.
Well, it goes back to business email etiquette more than anything else. Business email etiquette says if you're going to talk to somebody subordinate, you copy the boss.
Yeah.
And you know, you let them know what you're doing. And you certainly don't tell anybody what to do without going through the boss. And you certainly, you know, if nothing else, you say, you know, I just want to let you know about this, you know, MCC. I know also about handling this kind of gets back to what I was talking about the problem. You know, what etiquette standards do we have for email and phone calls and referrals?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I know when emails first came out, we started talking about how do we handle this too, because before it was memos and phone calls.
Yeah.
And you'd CC somebody on a paper memo. Well, now you have an email, and now how do you handle that because it's instantaneous, and you can easily send it to 500 people by mistake. But in the etiquette standard, I think is the problem we're going to seem to have here. The symptom is you get too many emails. Well, what's the etiquette on how you send out emails? And I know when I first got to be a council member, I asked some of the council members, how do we handle all these resident referrals? And think about that in the business world, client referrals, customer referrals. And the answer was, make sure you are copied, send it over to the appropriate department, and make sure you're copied and just ask them to keep you informed. That's it. You don't solve the problem, you pass the problem.
So you want the structure that drives the behaviors?
Yeah, and you just talked about one of the etiquette rules, and is we don't do after 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
So this kind of gets into what is the common etiquette that we'd like to see, the staff would like to see. And I know if I was the city manager, I would want to have my board of directors, council members, you know, telling my staff what to do. I want to know what's going on. So
Intentionally or inadvertently.
that's right.
Right.
So I guess it gets down to the etiquette question, rules of the road, and that's what I'd like to see.
So before you jump in, Steve, I will say now, this is me sharing an anecdotal experience, projecting my paradigm a bit for one end of the spectrum, right? As a former appointed and then elected official, I can't think of a single time. My point of contact was a superintendent and an assistant superintendent. There were 6 school site administrators in a very active, district of parents who were very helicopter hovering kind of thing, right? And always cared about their children. I love that. But in those 4 years, right, before I left that, I can't remember a single time ever emailing a school site administrator, even though I have people chirping in my ear about, hey, over here at such and such location, they're talking about eliminating, the gifted and talented education program and moving it over to this other middle school and blah, 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 blah. And it was pressing to these folks and the group of folks that this person represented, right? But I never once felt compelled, right, to email the administrator or the other people involved with that other than the superintendent. That was an etiquette that I was shown, a structure that I was shown, and that's how it worked. Now, these are not Malibu residents I'm talking about who I was representing. I know this is a different beast, but we can still have a structure that includes, if we are going to reach out, it's to these folks right here, or whomever will follow. That can be our etiquette, and then the question of volume, going back to Halen's point. What is too much? As a new person learning the ropes, you probably email, I'm guessing, 3 times as many as the rest of the folks around you. That's a guess, right? Because you're new, right? And that can be expected. And you're involved and active, all those things. So what is enough? What's too much, Bruce?
Okay, this is extremely valuable. And I hope that my responses that I provide are not taken to suggest that I dismiss any of this, because listening to it, I'm contemplating it. I feel it's really a shame that if this is an issue that's been going on, that we have to be discussing it for the first time in this setting, because to me, that's the kind of thing that really ought to just be raised when it occurs. That's my paradigm. I believe in raising issues when they need to be raised. But I think this is a nuanced issue. Most things are. The devil's in the details for most things. And I don't believe that generic rules are the way to address these issues. I think this is a much more nuanced and large issue. But I mean, I'm glad we're having this discussion. I truly am. I didn't appreciate that it was an issue in the first place, and it troubles me to learn for the first time in this setting that this is an issue.
I can understand.
And it makes me wonder how many other issues are there that I'm not aware of, not because I'm not self-aware, but because they're not even being asserted. And we need to be open. We've expressed that during our strategic planning sessions. No one here, I believe, and I know for me, no one here is going to bite anyone's head off or be aggravated by learning that there's a problem. It's important you can't address problems, you know problems.
One of the conditions precedent to use that legal term, but one of the conditions precedent to us doing that is asking this question: is Marianne approachable? Is Bruce approachable? Doug, Halen, Steve? And if you are, it's a much easier dialogue for us to have. And so you said it's more of an issue of not knowing rather than self-awareness. I think it's a combination of both, honestly. A little lack of self-awareness and then a lack of forthright communication, right? So I think it's two things together at the same time, both being.
Is there a perception that any of us are not approachable?
That's the question. And I think you'd have a hard time as elected people asking your people to answer that question, because you have to look at it. You know, they may say, "Oh, Bruce approachable," and they're backing up, going, "Yeah, Bruce, you're approachable, right?" And you have to do that. Now, let me give you my personal assessment before I go to Halen, then to Steve, and that is that I find you very set in a structured paradigm, but I have always felt in my interactions with you that you reason things out, and you're movable. You're not immovable. That's my take with it. But it takes a lot of effort to move you. It does. And that's a lot of work over here for the team, right? But you're not irrationally rigid in your paradigm and thinking the rest of the world is wrong if they're out of step with you. That's not you, right? So we're all on the spectrum of approachability. If someone says, "Hey, is Kelsey approachable?" Someone might answer, "Well, has she had her coffee yet?" Because, it depends, right? Halen, then Steve.
Oh, yeah. So I agree with some of that. I think that this is nuanced. I would like the rules of the road to be able to drive it safely, because I've never been quite told what's an inappropriate number. I do know that when I text Trevor on the weekend, I try not to. So I have self-regulation, and I want to so bad, and I'm like, yeah, totally. And I'm like, oh my God, I can't text this. So then I'll put it in to-do. But so I have been here for 5 months, and I've had minimal, believe it or not, interaction with staff. I don't find that there's a relationship to be approachable. I was told that minimal interaction with staff.
I don't mean to step on it, but you and I talked about this.
Yeah.
You would love to meet staff.
I
Get in there, and hey,
Yeah.
I'm Halen,
Right.
and But that's
I wasn't
not.
told by you guys.
That's not how it is designed typically.
Right.
Here in Malibu, in other
Oh.
cities they have that,
Well, I
right?
would
Sort
love
of
to.
meet the council kind of thing, but that may not be right what it is here, kind of thing. What was that,
I'm
Candace?
saying that was my idea.
Oh, great.
It
Like,
was shut down like a.
By who? Oh, I remember.
Like a payment.
Yeah.
I wanted to have each council was going to talk about leadership
Let's do it.
and why didn't. Yeah.
So the thing is, I
So,
think resentment
yeah,
festers.
it got shut down by some other folks, because I was trying to think of
But you're the
a great
boss.
way
And who,
to-
other than us as a
to-
collective, how can you be shut down by anybody?
Huh?
Because she reads the room.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Oh.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, and so, but I think that really needs to happen.
I
mean,
agree.
Because there's the us versus them culture is it's
That's
gotta
it.
stop.
Yeah,
And
that's
this
it.
is to Bruce's
That's
point,
it.
the longer that we let some of this stuff fester, the more resentment and an unhealthy environment will happen. So you coming in every 6 months when there's a complaint might not be effective. It might be that we have to do more of these sorts of things more often if you're seeing that there's resentment.
I'd like to rephrase your statement.
Sure, no
Because I'm
problem.
very effective.
Oh, no, I know, but like, there's, you have to.
That's your
That
paradigm.
is-
That's your
This could be more effective and
Right.
enhancing
That's
if we
right.
were still doing the other stuff as well.
Right.
Steve, what was your comment?
Right, two things. One, I'm an adult.
Right.
And you've got a city manager who is responsible for taking care of the city. If we're doing something wrong, we should hear that. Just tell me. I mean,
That's what I tell you all.
and we listen. I mean, I listen, right? I mean, I try not to do, I do not call people up and tell them what to do. I may call them up for questions, if I get information I need, but I don't, okay.
Is that allowed?
You know, I've got to be.
I mean, what's the point of us if we can't ask questions?
And then
I need
That's
to
good.
know
That's
that.
that's who you call.
Then I want to go back to what you said about me. Look, I've been involved in the city stuff for a long time, about at least 8 years, okay? And I know the staff, okay? And they know me. And if I call them up and say, they say, Steve, I can't do that, okay? I mean, I've got a communication ability to talk to them. And so I don't think I'm overburdening them, and they're not gonna let me overburden them, all right? If they say tough, the answer's tough. All right, and you walk away, you say, so I think this process of getting to know these people, letting them know us, I think can be helpful because you lose the fear that says, it's a city council person, geez, I got to, no.
Okay, I've got I've got a completely different thing.
Okay, well, you can.
I think I've known the staff infinitely better, having been a former staff member.
For
And
how long?
I was 17 years old,
Okay.
right before I became a council. So there's a lot of new people, so there's a lot of people I don't know now,
Yeah.
just because of turnover and everything else. And I know there is a completely different relationship that I now have with staff because I'm a council member. I am now here where I used to be here. And so when I can't have the same types of interactions and relationships because I went from being one of the group to now being the boss of the group.
Buddy
I
the
mean,
boss,
through,
yeah.
you know, and so there is a difference, and there is a different way that they interact with me just because of the sheer fact that I'm a council member now.
So you view it differently,
She's got
but
her
it doesn't
paradigm.
change the fact
Right.
that your experience can be your experience, right? That's, what you said could be very accurate. But I don't know, because I'm not involved, but you could have an accurate view of what you just described. So both of these things can be true. Like I said, two things can be true at the same time that are opposed, right? They can.
But that would be her paradigm because of her history, whereas I don't share that history because I didn't know them as intimately as you have, which I think is very valuable to maybe impart on us because you've seen both sides of things. But I still think that there's a relationship that doesn't have to be buddy-buddy. Or we call them up like, hey, we're down for lunch. But it just is like we are approachable because without that, we have an invisible wall that I feel.
Well, it goes back to the yes and then, the Candace. Right?
Yeah, I would love that.
There's the yes and then wall. That's it. We just don't need that. We also don't need,
Oh, us
being in
and
the
them.
trenches all the time.
Yeah.
Right, with them. You're not there in the weeds. You shouldn't be in the weeds. Richard and Candace shouldn't be in the weeds, right? They delegate. They leverage themselves to think more strategically and do all that they can. They delegate everything they can. Richard's like, are you kidding? I'm still pulling the weeds out of my socks right now.
What are you talking about?
We're, two comments. First of all, we're elected representatives. That's a given.
Yeah.
And we got elected because we have certain philosophies of how to govern and how to lead. And the philosophies that we exuded to the residents, they voted for.
Yes.
Right.
Okay? So we're doing what we were elected to do.
Right.
Right. And we clearly do need to align the management and the staff with what we need to, I'm having a hard time articulating this, but I mean, if they're intimidated or have a problem with our governance method, we need to fix that in some way, but the fix is not necessarily for us to govern differently, because the way we govern is what we were elected to do. Just like right now, I can't stand.
This is what you were elected to do.
Okay, I cannot stand, and I suspect there's tens of millions of people in this country that cannot stand the way this country's being governed. But that's the way the people decided to elect a person to do it. I think it's atrocious, but that's a minority opinion apparently. Okay, so I need to acclimate myself to the way it is, or change the government through through democracy.
Again, we're not talking about your role as a governance team, right? Because I said at the beginning, you guys are doing fine on these 4 pillars here that we're talking about. We are talking about the impact thereafter when you're supposed to, put it in the hands of a great shepherd, a great leader to fulfill your vision. Now that's the first boundary that happens, right? And you let that happen. Overseeing, right, their performance, etc., very important.
No, I think that my analogy is exactly apt. That was what used to be said about the Justice Department. But our president has said, no, you know what, legally, the Supreme Court's told me I'm allowed to direct them to do whatever I think is appropriate, which a lot of people are aghast. But that actually is what he's legally entitled to do, and he's doing it, and a lot of people don't like it. They need, unfortunately, to acclimate themselves to that, because that's the person that was elected, and that person has that power. I can speak for me, and I think I speak for Steve and Halen at least, we ran on platforms of, we're going to be very responsive to you individual residents, and we're going to be your representative with the staff of this city.
Did you run it this way? No, we're going to be very responsive to you. And if we have to burden the staff to do
Yes.
I didn't, but I did do responsive with civility, and hopefully I would understand if there is a disconnect between the way I act, that you would call me out on it, because that would be, which I know with Joe Tony there was, and I'll just call it out, with the code of conduct, I got a ding and I wanted it in public, but I didn't hire Joe Tony, right? So I came into this with an inherited city manager in a disaster.
No one hired him.
No, but that's where I think, if you're talking from an insurance point of view, they're going through all of these city managers, I think that's a false statement, in my opinion, right? Because we didn't hire him, or, we
It's
inherited.
not, that isn't the bigger picture issue then when it comes to that. And I didn't want to speak specifically to this, so I won't
Okay.
speak in general, right, hypotheticals, and say that this idea that, hey, I was voted to do this, and now we're putting parameters on it, Jerry, that are going to hinder my ability to do what I told the people who voted me in I was going to do. That's not true. We're not handcuffing you. We're not handcuffing you in any way. You can still be that person they elected, and you would lack character if you ended up, not being that person. But there are limits, right, to doing things if they're having an adverse overall impact on us. And it may not be you specific, it could be a little bit of this and that and the other, but we can't just say, hey, this is it, and those who aren't comfortable with it, acclimate like I did to the current administration in Washington, right? Doug and then Steve.
All right, I think this needs to be said about who voted us in, what our responsibility is. None of us, not every citizen in this town that voted for us, voted for the same reason. Some people voted for us because my name was first on the ballot, and they had no idea what we stood for.
That's my strategy usually.
And others, had a specific agenda they wanted to comply with. But I think when we got sworn in, we were elected by all the people. We were required to represent all, not the ones that just did. The minority that pushed us over 51%, whether they're tough. So we have to realize that there are people that we're representing, those that didn't vote for us, but we still represent them too. And just because we came up with a platform and said, well, this has to be balanced with those people who have a different opinion as well. We're representing all of you, not the ones that pushed us over 51% or 50%. And I think that's one of the things we have to keep in mind as you're talking about how we address
Yeah.
city staff, everybody else. Yeah, we may have had a practice going to push, but it hasn't been balanced.
Always, right, with fulfilling your trust that they've given you. The trust that they've given you with all this. Did I cut you short?
No, I think.
Yes, I thought there was a second.
I go back to, look, I used to manage a bunch of people, all right?
Yeah.
I had 26 division managers and company staff. And if somebody was doing something wrong, they could call me up and say, this guy's busting my chops. And I'd call that person and say, stop it. I mean, so I think if we're doing something wrong, I'd like to know about it. And I will do whatever I can, whether it's me or my appointees, to try and fix it. I mean, we're sitting here and again, we started out this whole meeting saying, are we doing something wrong? I mean, the fact that we spent half an hour trying to just figure that out tells you there's a lack of some communication that we should be having. That's just my one man's opinion.
I think it's healthy to have this discussion start because you all have had various comments on the subject. And understand, this meeting wasn't intended to solve anything, just to enlighten on a couple of points, right, of why we are where we are, and to say, hey, you know what? There are things that we can always improve on, right, when it comes to our interactions as a governance team with the employees of the city of Malibu, so that we can all keep rowing that boat toward the same objectives, right? Am I rowing the right way there, or should I be rowing this way on that? So, and just to finish this thought, then I'll go to Doug and then Steve, is this. Structure drives behavior, right? Systems thinking, structure drives behavior. All we've done today is build more structure with the hopes of harvesting the behaviors that are going to be optimal for everyone. Not just one of you, but all of you as a governance team, and those who are boots on the ground striving to implement your vision for this great city, right? And so that's what we've been trying to do today, build structure to drive behavior. Every systems thinker knows, if this, then that. And so that's what we talked about, that 8 p.m. thing, that no weekend thing. And we ended up, we never finished on our direct communication with employees in the city and the impact that has. Should we be doing that at all, right? And my time's almost up, so I'm just bringing that up to let you know that these are discussions that need to continue for the reasons Steve just said. If there are best practices or negatively impactful practices that we're engaged in, let us know. I'm a full-grown man, right, who can be heard along those lines. But understand, in every city that I work with, the city attorney and the city executive team, they're always walking a fine line, a balanced line, right? Because they serve as your pleasure, right? And that always makes it hard for there to be directness, which is why I have the opportunity to come in and do that. And so just understand, if it doesn't come, don't jump to the judgmental or accusatory side of, dang it, just talk to us, right? It's not easy conversations to have, right, from my seat. Doug, you had your hand in that, Steve.
All I wanted to say is this has been very productive, and we're maybe running out of clock. And I think you got more slides. Is there anything that you feel like we've got to cover?
No. It's more important to have the dialogue about, our practices, what we're doing, our customs that are impacting us. And I don't think it should end here. I think it should continue in other situations where you can have those discussions. Talk about, what are those additional things, and how are we going to train our commissioners? That should be a discussion, that you have as well. How are we going to help educate them? It could be directly, if they're people that you saw to get appointed, or it could be in a training session, right? Not by me, it could be with our city leadership team who has that, or Trevor who does that, Stephen and David.
2 points. Hire a city manager. Our job is, look, if we hire a good city manager who we respect, who we can talk to, who will talk back to us, we will not have the issue of not having the communication. If something goes wrong, they will, look, I think Candace is a very smart person. And I have no doubt, if she calls me and says you're doing something wrong, I have no doubt that I'm going to believe her. And I'm going to try and fix it. So if I got a city manager that I respect, that we've hired, that we think really knows how to do the job, that does it well, that will eliminate it will facilitate them, their ability to talk to us and make sure we're staying right on the track, okay? I just.
No,
I think that's an important.
that's a valid point.
Very important part.
It's a valid point, and in small towns where we attract and retain these city managers, usually we hire experienced assistant city managers or town administrators and give them their first job in a smaller town. Malibu might be the exception because of your marquee state of who you are. But the point is, every time that city administrator comes along, if they have to keep telling you this stuff, right, and again, more time, more work, but it is part of their job to help you understand and remain within those boundaries. So Halen, then Mary Ann.
I go, the last one talking about training. We do not train our staff. I mean, I've got new people on the planning commission. Look, I was on the planning commission. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot. You got to understand where to go find stuff. You got to know what you're supposed to read. You got to be able to, you know, there's the LCP, there's the municipal code, there's the general plan, there's the other document, the city planning commission interpretation. If they understand that, it makes their life, and it reduces the amount of time we're going to complain about stuff, right? I mean, that to me, look, if it's done right, I don't have to do anything. My life becomes easy, and that's what I think we should be striving to try and make that happen.
Very good. Point taken.
And to piggyback on that, because I have heard that the commissioners might be part of this issue, but we have 2 new commissioners on planning. That's a huge thing. The city wanted that, right? I listened, they
Brand
said.
new, Halen, no experience?
No
No
experience,
experience, none. And so therefore, we also had a fire, we had myself, we had PCH folks, we had transition and executive staff. So if we're hearing the commissioners are PIAs or whatever, there's a real reason for that I think needs to be acknowledged, right? Or because there hasn't been training. I haven't either. I mean, I went to my city council thing, but I was in the middle, that was 5 days after the fire, right? So the thing is that we also have to keep in mind staff is spread thin. I hear that quite often. And therefore, it's not just on the council. I don't know how to train my commissioner. So there has to be some sort of like, also accountability on the staff side to do some of this. I do believe that maybe this is we recircle for the strategic workplace workshop, where there is a culture part of that, but we have to really have transparent discussions with where our shortcomings are. Instead of hearing it 5 months later, we do need to have some concrete examples of where commissioners are failing, where council is failing, or it just becomes this kind of broad thing that we're not doing our job. And I also want to point out that as council people, we also toe a fine line. I believe that I'm constantly towing a very sensitive line between staff, the Brown Act, the residents, and so I appreciate all of this, but I think we do need to have more of it, especially training, because if there is shortcomings, they need to be trained before they staff complains about it. So that's all I have.
Very good, and I'll touch base with our executive team to talk about what resources they have in JPIA. And I know they're willing to, for the benefit of the members, right? Your membership has its benefits, right? That they'd be willing to fund a lot of these things as well.
I honestly think but I think a lot of these concerns will go away as we bring more people on and to bring on the capacity to handle the absolute amount of work that's going on. Because you actually right now understaffed and we have more work, particularly through this public, with everyone, and we're just understaffed. And I think that's why, you know, you're hearing this, but we're working really hard to fill those vacancies and, you know, whoever sits in the city after, that's going to be a real focus. Maybe not when you're so much better. It's just that so few people having so much more work. And that's where it's like, hey, I just, you know, I don't have the capacity to handle this much more of, say, FYI or this, that, or so. It's just keep that cognizant until we're able to fill those vacancies. The other thing, structure is really important. I just, you know, I learn things every day. It would be really helpful to have a resource guide on our websites, you know, that says, because I got an email about somebody's trash bin yesterday. You know, if you need to worry about your trash bin, call this person if you're in this part of the neighborhood, or call this person. Or, you know, if it has a guide for like service providers and also service delivery. And I think that that's something that would be really helpful. not only just for all the residents, but also for you to be able to say, hey, go to here, you're gonna see this at, because there's no such thing, it's just like when I walked in the door, I got handed a binder and figure it out. And so, you know, it's good to have all the resources in place. I think it'll reduce a lot of this email stuff.
Yeah, definitely going to alleviate the pressure on you in many ways if we do
Okay, I
that.
have two things. One, you know, I think also whoever does get hired as a city manager, there has to be a universal acceptance of their capabilities. I think what's happened in the past is that there isn't respect for that person who has been hired in that role. Regardless of, you know, whatever. That person had got elected, or that person got appointed by a group of individuals for a certain skill set. So there has to be a respect of that position, period. With regards to resources and everything, the website is filled with information. People don't want to go and take that step themselves.
That's when it's be consolidated.
Well, there's a couple different things. There's also, we have a resident base that oftentimes has somebody to do that for them. So for them to take that action, that's outside their paradigm.
Yeah.
Because the website does have a vast amount of information. Could it be organized in a better way? Yeah.
Just a nice little cheat sheet, right?
Just a cheat sheet,
Yeah.
that's all somebody needs.
So Bruce and then Haley.
So first of all, when I responded before Sure about the emails, what I was saying non-verbally was, I don't agree with this, but I'll abide by it. So Sure means yes, I will abide by it. I think though that if we've got a council that likes to be more communicative and do so in any time they want to, we should be focusing on that when we're hiring a city manager. You know, we don't need to necessarily adapt to what someone else wants. We can make sure that we hire the people that work the way we want. That was my experience professionally for 30 to 40 years. In fact, I went to a place that had a very traditional background and we changed it completely. We shook it up and made it much more nimble and much more responsive to our clients. When you have a difficult client, you don't make them have to be a better client. You respond to the difficult client by having the staff that can handle that. I think we need a different staff. And Steve and I, 4 years ago, ran on a proposition that we needed some type of different people, and we're actually getting them.
So I don't, were you done? I don't want to cut you
Yeah, I'm
off.
done.
So I hear what you're saying. There's certain things in the world, though, that while not going to be embraced by everybody or believed by everybody or internalized to their paradigm, carry a great deal of truth. For example, I've never seen this statement written anywhere. A great leader is a micromanager. I don't think I'll ever see that written, right? With the hundreds of municipalities that I have as clients, I have never seen somebody embrace the idea that, you know, we want a city manager and administrator who we can have access to 24/7 whenever we want for whatever we need, you know, and can call them in the middle of the night, which is my optimal speaking time between 1 and 3 in the morning. I want to hire the person that's available to me then, right? I don't know that there is a person that you are going to find who has the experience that you're looking for. We talked about this. Who has the knowledge base, the subject matter expertise of municipal government and administration that is also going to take this job with the caveat, hey, we want to be able to access you all the time. I just don't ever, I've never seen that person. So more power to you, but I'm not sure even if you find them that is the best practice. That's just one paradigm to another, right, on that.
So I love the idea of a chart for all the agencies that govern, at least for me.
You mean like the cheat sheet kind
Yeah,
of thing?
because
Okay.
I have spent the last 5 months trying to figure out who, beaches and harbors, county, MRCA, Santa Monica Mountain. And then I have residents emailing and texting me and I go, I don't think that's in the city of Malibu's jurisdiction. We just have this with the tow yard thing. And so if we could kind of like distill down who does what in Malibu proper, it would help alleviate, I would have contacts and then I could say, just go to the county. This is the beaches at Harbors. The bathrooms don't work. They really should work, but that's not Malibu. So I think that would be very helpful for me personally to get like an audit of who does what everywhere in the city. Like Zoom Pass, Underpass, not City of Malibu.
All right, thank you. We are over on our time. We want to feed people, right, Kelsey?
Yes, we have lunch.
And then we'll get into the Brown Act with Trevor. So keep this dialogue going, right? Keep it foremost on their mind as far as, hey, what else are we doing? What can we be doing, right? How can we keep training our people, employee and commissioner?
What we've done today is increase the amount of communication from them back to us.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, that to me is the,
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the phrase I want to use is, you gotta be able to tell, you gotta be able to tell us that the kids were.
All right, check, ready, break. If you have to adjourn,
Kelsey, what am I?
Recess.
We're gonna recess
Okay.
for a break, and then we'll return with Brown Act. Everybody ready?
Wait,
Okay.
1 second, Madam Mayor.
All right.
Okay.
Okay, we're calling to order the educational program for city council and commissioners. Do we have any public comment?
Yes, we have one speaker and Peg.
Okay, come on in.
So basically, just want to remind everybody, whenever you have 3 or more, planning commission or joint council, 3 or more, you have to, it's open to the public, which excludes the media. So currently, right now, you're live, and at the same time, we're recording it. The city, thankfully, is pretty much public record. And so you'll be able to have access to the public record. Thank you.
Okay. So now I'm going to turn this over to Trevor and Kellen, if you haven't all met Kellen, and they're going to teach us all about Brown Act.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming down and spending time with us here on Wednesday. I just wanted to start out, if we could everyone just go around and introduce themselves and what commission you're on so we all can know everybody who's here. John, if you don't mind starting.
John Mazza, Planning Commission.
Doug Stewart, council member.
Marnie Timmons, Planning Commission.
Mary Ann Riggins, council member.
Malin Conrad, council member.
Warren Haney, chairs, wastewater advisory committee.
Dennis.
Dennis Robert Smith, Arts Commission.
Paul Grisani, Mobile Home Rent Control.
Kevin Puffenberger, wastewater advisory commission.
Pamela Conley, Ulica Arts Commission.
Kevin, you want to start this roll off?
Kevin Keegan, Public Works Commission.
Elizabeth Riddick, planning commission. Micah Bellsberg, public works commission.
Skylar Peak.
Alexis Hardy, public safety.
Rob Blackman, organization.
Josh Spiegel, Safety.
Drew Leonard, Planning.
Rebecca Evans, planning commission recording secretary.
Gail Duncan, administrative assistant for planning.
Kevin Shaky,
Well, thank you for everyone coming down, especially you commissioners who haven't started the meetings yet. So appreciate it. So today we're just going to go through a number of subjects that you're going to deal with as a commissioner. Some of our educational, some of our Brown Act, some of our best practices. A lot of what we're going to talk about will probably focus more on the Planning Commission, since the Planning Commission has a role beyond what the other commissions do in terms of approving permits. And we'll go through sort of the very current procedures and best practices to deal with that also. We'll also have time at the end for any questions anyone has, and we'll just have our contact information. If you have any questions that come up during this and we don't get to, please do follow up. So, starting out here talking about sort of the structure and roles at the city, and we're in the council manager form of government. This is a form of government in California that was put through to deal with basically corruption and problems that were happening historically when council members were directly appointing staff members, and a lot of corruption issues. And so it creates a separation between the administration in the city and then the legislative and quasi-judicial functions of the city. And so the way the staff runs and the day-to-day is controlled by the city manager, who answers to the city council, who then gives the direction and also with the policies for the city and deals with any appeals or applications for permits of the city. So as a commissioner, that's what this means for you, is that if you have anything you need or any questions, you should be reaching out to the city manager or your designated liaison. So if there's junior staff or other people that particular planner on, that you might have a question or something that you want to know, go through your liaison, because they will structure and be able to coordinate if you get any information or you know, work with anyone else. The Planning Commission, this is a body that's authorized by state law. It's created by the City Council, and their job is to exercise their judgment and then reflect the community values in implementing the law. And they're responsible for a number of specific rules, including improving land use entitlements, and then evaluate, and they also evaluate and provide recommendations regarding changes to the municipal code and the local coastal program. In Malibu, we're complicated than most planning commissions because our entire city is located within the coastal zone, which means every application needs to be evaluated for whether a coastal development permit is needed or not beyond just the requirements of our municipal code. And the interaction between those is very complicated, so thank you, commissioners. It is a lot of work to sort that out. And to have to know two codes and how they apply is a lot more than what most planning commissions have to deal with. Our other commissions are created by the City Council, and their job is generally to evaluate and provide recommendations and advice to the City Council. And this would be on projects or other plans, you know, or even potential legislation, things that are put on a work plan by the City Council for the commissions to deal with. And these are defined by the City Council. They give the direction, and then the chair or the other designated representative, there's a portion of every regular meeting for a report from the commission. It's not for any commissioners to come and talk. It's for a report about what happened at the commission. If you guys want to have someone come and speak, there's a time on each regular meeting that the commission can designate someone to come and report what happened at the meetings. For other items, there will be sometimes more formal involvement of the commissions to be involved in presentation when there's particular projects or legislation coming through. Work with the liaison, sort of work on how that works in a particular situation. Staff's role. So staff's role is to help you out. They're to identify the law and analyze new facts, provide information needed by your commission to do your job. If you have questions, if you need to know things, you know, that's what staff's here for. They offer their professional opinion, but you guys are the ones that make, you know, you're taking their opinion, but you're also applying your own with your recommendation. Staff's role is they're accountable to the city manager, but they work with the commission. So other people that are involved in this is the community, and the community's role is to add insights, bring other evidence, participate, you know, give their opinion about especially legislative items, what they think would be best for the city, or bring other things to light to aid in the commission's decisions and what they think in terms of their determinations or recommendations. When we have an application in the Planning Commission, the role of the applicant is to be forthcoming, to provide the facts, propose projects that comply with the local coastal program municipal code, and then to provide evidence to support those findings. They provide substantial evidence if they want to have their application approved. So, transparency laws. So we're talking about the Brown Act. So the Brown Act has a number of provisions, and this includes that all meetings of the body are open and public, everyone can participate, that we allow public comment on any item that's on an agenda. Everyone has an opportunity to participate and say something. For our regular meetings, there's also an opportunity for the public to comment about items not on the agenda. That's only for regular meetings, not for special meetings. Special meetings are about a single topic, and in that case, you hope that the public was only allowed to comment on the items on the special meeting agenda. There are different types of meetings. You guys don't have to worry a lot about that. You have your regular meetings, which is what you deal with normally. Then there are special meetings for individual topics or a couple of topics. There are different noticing requirements, but you don't have to worry about that. Our great city clerk over here will handle all the provisions about posting. There's less notice needed for a special meeting than a regular meeting within 72 hours notice. The big thing is that any item that's not on the agenda cannot be discussed. And for a regular meeting, that means it has to be published 72 hours beforehand. Again, stuff about that. And the whole purpose here is that there's no secret meetings. And so that all deliberations and discussions need to occur in public, after providing public notice of what was discussed. So you might have something come before you, think you have great ideas, and you want to go talk to your commissioners about it, or send them an email and tell them your thoughts or what you think they should be doing. Do not do that, because the whole purpose of this is that once you have 3 people or quorum on your body, discussing it, that's deliberation. If you're talking about having a discussion, and the public's not part of that. You might not know all the facts. That's why you have it on an agenda, so the public can show up and present other evidence and information that may come into play in terms of what decision you want to make. And so no decision should be made by you until after you've heard everything presented at the public meeting. So, what is a meeting? Under the Brown Act, a meeting is very broadly defined. So this is when a quorum of your body hears, discusses, deliberates, or takes action on something within the city's subject matter jurisdiction. So you should not be communicating with your other commissioners. You can have one Brown Act body, one Brown Act buddy, if you are in a body that has 5 members. So you can have one person to talk things over with or to go and meet with, but you cannot discuss with anybody else. And sometimes a commissioner will come to you and say, hey, let's talk about this item. If you already talked about it with somebody else, make sure you just say, hey, I can't talk about this one because I already have a Brown Act buddy on this one. And I think everyone will understand. So what is permitted? So you can have individual contacts and conversations between yourself and another member of the public, not another commissioner. So you're welcome to talk to anyone else, staff, members of the public. You can have any type of contact you want. You can express, ideas that you have, especially about legislative items. But if you have ideas about a particular project that's coming before you, you should hold off on forming your opinion until after you've heard all the evidence. We'll talk about it later, but if you do express an opinion or publish an opinion or advocate for or against a project that's coming before you, it will require your recusal, because the applicant coming forward has a right to a fair hearing before an unbiased decision maker. And if you have expressed, you've already made an opinion about this, you already have made a determination, then it wouldn't be a fair hearing. One-way informational communications to members of the body. So this is people or staff sending information to all 5 commissioners or council members. That's a lot of people can submit that information coming from them to the body. The issue is you don't want to have the body communicating to each other. And there are special exceptions for when you can have the majority of your commission talking together, but they're very limited. So these are things like a social event, if you're at a Dodger game, if you're at a conference. There's certain exceptions that would apply in particular circumstances. If you think one applies, come and talk to us, myself and Kellen, and we'll go through the facts. It can be very fact specific, but in general, you don't want to be talking with each other, and especially there's almost no exception to allow you to talk about the business that's going before your commission outside of the notice and open public meetings.
I'm so sorry.
So that all sounds easy. Just don't talk to 2 other commissioners about anything, but it can get more complicated because there's more rules. So there's something called a serial meeting, and this is something you have to be very careful about. And this is basically when either directly or through intermediaries or technology you have a discussion of commission business outside of a meeting, and it's expressly prohibited. And this can happen in a few different ways. So one example is A talks to B, B talks to C. So 2 commissioners are talking about an item, and then one of the commissioners goes and talks to a 3rd commissioner. They all don't talk together in the same room, but that would be considered to be a Brown Act violation. The other situation would be you have 3 commissioners, A, B, and C, and you have X, who could be a member of the public or even a member of staff, and it's called a hub and spoke. And the issue in that one, all those communications are okay between that, but if X is telling B and C what A said, then you have a Brown Act violation. And it's for this reason you want to be very careful about when you speak with anyone, especially someone who's not staff, who's not trained about the Brown Act, because there's going to be a big temptation, especially if you're talking to maybe X is someone who's is their project, or they're opposed to a project, and you speak with them, you're like, oh yeah, I really think what you're saying is important, I agree with you, I'm gonna, vote, this way, or I'm concerned about these things, then they're gonna want to tell the other commissioners, say, well, A, is on my side, you should be on my side too. And then they say it to C, and then you have a problem, because now they know what the other commissioners are thinking, and other commissioners are doing. So be very careful about that. So when you meet in public, especially if you're talking about an application, don't tell them, it's okay to listen, but I strongly recommend you don't tell them what your current thinking is or your analysis of a project, especially how you plan to vote, because that could easily end up resulting in a Brown Act violation and requiring your recusal from having it to be considered for you. Okay, there's an exclusion. If you're speaking with staff, you can speak with staff about the project. Staff just can't communicate what you are saying to another council member or another commissioner. They know not to do that. All right, now the internet is even more difficult to deal with. So be very careful dealing with online participation or commenting. So number one, you can, make posts on the internet. You can, state things on Facebook or however you want to deal with social media. But another commissioner, not even one, can comment or post off of yours, because the thought process from the state is if there's a post and it says, Commissioner A thinks XYZ, and Commissioner B says, well, I do too. Well, then you have a third commissioner looking at it, then they know are thinking about something, and now you have three that, know, at least one person's gonna know what a majority of quorum is thinking about a particular issue. If there's an article or something else written by someone that's not a commissioner or a council member, a single member of a commission, could comment on that. Nobody else could. But in general, my recommendation is just avoid it. Try not to have a problem with things, but don't respond to other people's posts. All right, best practices.
So the assumption is that we know every commissioner in this city, and that we know when that, I'm just gonna be honest, right? Like there's sometimes turnover. So I'm not sure I know 100% every commissioner that sits on every commission. So.
You don't need just on your commission.
So that's what I mean. So you just mean per commission itself?
Yes.
Not, okay.
If you're on the Public Works Commission, you can have thoughts about the Planning Commission. It can't be about a topic that you guys are covering in your subject matter jurisdiction. So you have to be very concerned about the other commissioners on your commission.
Okay.
Okay, so best practices, definitely don't reply all. I think staff generally tries to BCC the commission or the council when they send things out, just to avoid the easy mistake. Do not send messages to the entire commission. Do not comment on online posts, especially another member of the commission already has. All right, transparency law. So in California, we have a sunshine law, the California Public Records Act, and the case law has just been expansive on this historically, and it's a huge cost and actually burden on cities. The expense of dealing with Public Record Act requests can get quite expensive. Everyone has a right to inspect the public records of any state or local agency. A public record is very broadly defined, and is any writing containing information related to the conduct of the public's business retained by any public agency, regardless of physical form or characteristics. This covers paper, emails, text, drawings, tapes, CDs, DVDs, MP3s, and basically anything could be considered to be a public record under this. And then under the San Jose case, records related to the public's business, regardless of their physical form or characteristics, sent or received by officials via their personal devices, are available for public inspection and copying. So you need to be very careful about how you're using your personal email accounts and your personal devices, because if you're conducting city business on those are subject to being disclosed. You'll get an email from Kelsey if we get a PRA request about communications on your commission, and you'll be in charge of searching those documents and then producing them to the city to turn over, and if you don't, you could get yourself in trouble. Yes?
I'm gonna request that I get an email from the city of Malibu for my Arts Commission, because I'm a lawyer and I have attorney-client privilege on my email. So I want a separate email box for the Arts Commission. Is that possible?
The policy decision at the city has been not to allow, to only have the city council have those email addresses and not the commissions. What you can do though is have like a Gmail address, create a new account that would just say, you know, Pamela Arts Commissioner, Malibu Arts Commissioner at gmail.com, and that will be the address that's published by the city and put out. I would suggest doing all your business through that separate account. I strongly recommend you do that. You don't intermix it for exactly that reason. You know, and it's not just attorneys. Other people have, you know, private messages and things you don't want to have disclosed. And if you're intermixing them, those messages aren't public records that would have to be disclosed if you're, you know, emailing with your family or something like that. But there's a possibility that would have to be reviewed for privilege by, you know, our office, or potentially in a lawsuit, you know, by a judge or by somebody else doing a forensic analysis. So separation is the key. If you keep it all consolidated, just create any place to get a free email address, use that one, and you use it only if someone emails you to your personal account. Say, please, this is my personal email. If you have any commission business, please send it to, you know, this email address. There are protections that were put in to protect your personal email address, but if you use it to communicate for city business, then it doesn't apply. So we talked about creating an unofficial city email for city business is strongly recommended. Don't use that account for personal. So if you do create a commissioner email address, don't use it for other things, so you can keep it all, you know, tied in there. It also makes it easy to search if we do get the PRA requests. Don't have an account where it sends all your email into, you know, consolidates all your email addresses. Keep this one separate. You want to keep it clean. And then, you know, if you have this email address, you do need to comply with the city's, you know, document destruction policies, retention schedule. So check with the city clerk and us before deleting things in there. You don't have to keep everything forever, but you know, we do have obligations if they are public records. And there's been an expansion in some of the trial court law dealing with Public Records Act requests. It used to be a lot more, the courts were more respectful of the transitory exception of the Public Records Act. Records under the Public Records Act that are considered transitory don't need to be retained, but there's been an expansion in a number of trial court decisions about what they consider transitory and what not. The city of LA got in some trouble for having an instant message system that would automatically delete everything every day. There's been other similar situations, so better safe than sorry. Same thing if you have emails on your private devices and accounts. Again, just keep everything separate. Okay, hypothetical question. All 5 members of the city commission are attending a conference. 3 of them go out to dinner. Is this a Brown Act violation?
If you talk business.
If they don't
If you talk
discuss
business.
They don't discuss commission businesses.
Very good. You guys have gone through this already, so we have some Brown Act experts out here. Correct. So you can go out to dinner. You can talk about the Dodgers. You can talk about someone's kids. You can, you know, talk about the weather, and that's fine. Just also be aware, though, and there's also an exception for a conference. If you are attending a conference, that's an exception to the Brown Act. You can have a full, you know, council or commission, you know, attend there. You can't go and discuss, you know, the city's business, you know, there, but you can attend. If you go out to dinner, just be aware, especially if you're going to in Malibu, they see 3 of you are there. People may get, you know, suspicious, and it may give the appearance that you're busy. So just be clear that, you know, just be careful, you know, when you're out there. Make sure that you do stay not on any conferences, you know, city business. Another one. During a commission meeting, 3 of the 5 members frequently look down at their laps. A local blogger later asked if they violated the Brown Act by sending texts or emails to each other about agency business. Is this a Brown Act violation?
Yes.
If they were.
If they are doing that.
They were discussing about the
But
voting.
they're looking at, they're texting emails.
Yes, so if you're a doctor, or your kid's like in the hospital or something, you can check your email, Best practice is not to do that because it does give the appearance that you're, doing that. There's always the paranoia that, someone in the audience is texting, the city council or the commission and telling them what to say. So I suggest not doing that, especially during a public hearing. Jefferson Wagner, if you remember, was on the council. You would put his phone in a plastic bag and put it on the dais so everyone could see it that he was not using it during the meeting. That's not required. It's a nice touch, but not required. But
Code of conduct says.
there you go.
And you could have another phone in the flat.
Now you sound like the kids trying to get out of school, right? It's true. So, yes, and there's also an issue too, is if it's a public hearing and someone in the audience is telling you information or something like that, that's a problem because all evidence needs to be disclosed in the record to the public. Whatever you're using to make your decision needs to be, done in public, not privately. And that's why before the public hearing starts, we have disclosures where everyone explains any information. You can talk to someone beforehand. You got information, then you say it. I met with, John Smith, at his property, and I was looking at this, and I noticed that, the ground, that there was this, there's a protected tree on his property that would not be destroyed by this. Stay it, then, the public has a chance to say something. And John can go up and say, actually, that you might think that's a protected sycamore, but actually it's, a ficus, and, it looks like this because X, Y, Z. So they have a chance to address it. So you get information, you need to disclose it so that it's out there and the public can come and speak about it and test it. Yes?
Can the public ask for your text after the meeting?
Absolutely. That's the other danger is even if you're not texting about something that would be, a violation of the Brown Act or about that hearing, it could be embarrassing. And there was a situation in a neighboring city where it was a staff member who was texting during the meeting and was making disparaging remarks about people that were presenting. And that ended up coming out and they lost their job. It was a really bad look. So just be aware that stuff is subject to the PRA. You are under scrutiny. And if you have to check, during the meeting, everyone, there are circumstances you need to, but try to limit it. And if you can, avoid it. Legal principles. So when we're conducting hearings, we have to, there's a number of sort of rules and principles involved. So first is equal protection. Under this, you need to treat similarly people similarly. We don't play favorites. We apply the law the same. Some of our laws could be interpreted different ways. There's a gray area about some things. And in that case, we generally try to respect precedent and it's a matter of fairness. You're not absolutely bound by how a certain section of the municipal code has been interpreted before. Sometimes it can be subject to other interpretations, but we do want to treat similar people fairly. It also lets people predict and be able to understand when they're proposing a project or put something forward and what they can expect. So if that changes, that makes it difficult. And it also can impact the city's ability to defend its decision. So there's a body of case law, if someone challenges a decision, that gives deference to the decision of a council or a commission because they're seen to be the experts, because you're dealing with this law and our city's laws and regulations on a regular basis. And because of that, there's deference given to it, and it's difficult for someone else to say it should have interpreted a different way. If you're not following a consistent interpretation, then that goes out the window. That'll make this decision more subject to overturn. Yes?
When we have written interpretations of the LIP, the codes and everything, are we supposed to follow those?
Yes. So I'm on the Planning Commission, and everyone in general should know there are a number of policies that have been adopted. There's two different types. One is council policies that apply to a wide range of items, and then there's also planning policies, and these have been adopted by the planning director, will not be the community development director, and what these are they're adopted at a staff level after a lot of consideration to deal with complicated issues in our codes and trying to have a consistent interpretation of them. So those policies are available. If you don't have a copy, staff can get those to you easily, but you should be familiar with them, and staff should be applying them and putting them forward in the staff report so that you're aware of them. You want to follow, that's the whole purpose of the policies, is to encourage and the consistency in how we interpret our code. Yes?
Say, staff is no longer really giving suggestions to approve a project or deny a project. Is that part of the interpretation, or?
That's not a policy. I mean, that's not a planning policy. So what you're talking about is a staff level determination of the city manager and the community development director about which projects. I think it's generally only dealing with variances where they will present the evidence, but haven't been including a staff recommendation on variances usually, I think.
And we do provide a resolution that can be considered for adoption or amendment at the meeting, just to provide some basis.
So that's a policy decision, you know. Some cities provide no recommendations, some provide recommendations in every item. It runs the gamut again.
So, I think this is specific to quasi-judicial commissions, which I think the planning commission is mentioned, and also the mobile home.
Could be yours. Yep.
Are you suggesting that the commissioners are bound by a policy determination made by staff rather than the council?
You're not bound. So your job as a commissioner is to apply the law to the facts. And there are areas of the law that are open to interpretation in different ways. What I'm saying is that policies here are meant to ensure consistency. So if you disagree with it, you can. But if you do, then it can run into issues. We will get less deference towards that if it departs from how we've been treating other people. And it also can open up you to questions, especially if, there's some other reason. If we're approving projects with one interpretation for maybe someone of a particular race, and someone of a different race gets a different interpretation or different issues, it can create problems. So we just try to be consistent in how we do it, but it comes down to the commissioners to look at the law and you say, staff has this wrong, and you have the ability to do that. You are not bound by that. They can bring it up, if they go and challenge it in court, but the deference is given is going to be based on the plain language of what you have there, the reasonableness of the interpretation, and then the longevity of how long it's been applied and how consistently it's been applied. Due process, so this is, everyone needs to notice an opportunity to be heard before an unbiased decision maker. So you get everyone a fair hearing. That's very important that everyone comes up there, even if they disagree with the decision, they feel that it was fair. And that it wasn't someone that already made a decision up before that they showed up, that they were heard, they got to say, their piece, and, sometimes the chips don't fall, the way you want it to, but you want everyone to respect the process, because when people don't respect the process and don't think it's fair, then you lose trust in the system, and people get, very upset. And, people will always be disappointed, but if you give a fair process, it takes the sting out of that a lot. Regulatory takings. So this is an issue mostly dealing with the Planning Commission, and we'll talk more slides coming up about this in terms of the conditions that you apply, or in terms of the legislation that's put through. You could run into issues where you're considered to take someone's property and end up paying compensation for it. And there's also preemption in state mandates. State law, will preempt us. An example here is in our city, the Coastal Act generally will supersede anything in our municipal code if there's a direct conflict between it, because that's a state law that's being applied in the city. So in areas that not covered by the Coastal Act, we have full discretion. We can also put in things that are more protective of the environment in our municipal code, and those will be applied in addition to the Coastal Act, but we can't put things in to undermine what's in our local coastal program. So, regulatory taking, this is a very high level sort of look at this. So, the big test is sort of the Nolan-Dolan body of law, and under this, a regulation of taking or condition, if the government demands an exaction that lacks a nexus with a legitimate state interest or lacks proportionality to the project's impacts. So that basically means if you are putting a condition on the project It has to have some kind of nexus, some kind of reason. You can't just be like, all right, your business needs to close at 3 o'clock. You need to have a reason. So this is, for traffic impacts or for other kind of, how it's going to, interact with the neighborhood. You have to have a reason for why you're doing it. Or why are you going to make somebody, okay, you need to go, add an extra balcony in this in here, or you need to move your house backward to this side. You need to have a reason to be able to do that. You need to have a nexus to the project and to the impacts from it. It has to be proportional. So, the Nolan Dolan cases, dealt with a situation where it was famously that, there was a project coming through and it required a public easement to be put across the property. And there was no nexus to why building a house would require you to go and put through a public access in that area. It was proportional to the impacts. They weren't blocking a public access from somebody else or, negatively impacting that. And so something you need to consider, it's not just carte blanche to put conditions in. You need to think intelligently about how it applies to the project, why you would need to do it and to what degree. And it ties into the evidence presented and the findings you need to make. Yes?
In the Nolan Dolan case, because the state was completely wrong, did the state have to pay all the legal fees of the person that brought the case?
I couldn't tell you, but I would imagine they would. You have, the public attorney general statute. If you put something forward that has broad impact, you do. But there's also a body of law that if you have your own selfish interest in your own property, you're not subject to it. So I don't know the answer on whether they got the insurance case in that case.
Is that for variances?
Yes. Yep. For anything. Any condition you want to put on the project, you want to be able to tie it to a reason that you need to have it, and then make sure it's proportional to the impact that it's having. Yes?
So just to follow up, she asked for a variance. So is it only projects that include a variance,
No,
or
for
any project
any
regardless?
condition, you become
if
conditional
it's
use permit.
Well, if you're gonna not grant a variance or say no, do you have to have analysis?
So this.
Or is it the fact that it's a variance?
So the fact that it's a variance is not enough to deny a project. You need, when it comes down to the project, we're looking at whether to grant or not, to look at the evidence and whether, they presented substantial evidence that demonstrates you can make the findings. And there's like 7, findings that need to generally be made for a variance in the city, including, impacts on public safety, neighbor compatibility, a whole number of different reasons. So you have to be able to identify that reason, and if you have evidence showing that it's going to have a negative impact for these, you couldn't deny the project. This proportionality more comes into play if you're going to approve a project, maybe got a variance or some other request, and you're like, well, I can approve it so long as it's conditioned that it's moving out of farther from the ESHA or from a pathway or some reason that you would need it. There has to be some kind of reason, justifiable reason that's proportionate with what conditions you put in. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Do these nexuses need to be stated during the open meeting at that time?
Yes. So when you're making your decision, you're explaining what you do. You want to be able to point to the evidence for why you're making that decision. Generally, staff will help with this. And they'll, when you have a resolution put forward, staff will be putting forward evidence about why the findings can be made or why they can't be made, and they'll be put into that. If it's brought back as you make different changes to it, then it will help that. If you identify, staff will help you with that process. But you need to identify. You say this is a problem because I'm seeing this as a coastal bluff and it needs to be farther set back. You need to lay the basis out there. Otherwise, it's just arbitrary. You can't. We don't make decisions by, okay, let's take a vote in the audience. Who likes the project? Who doesn't? You don't just put a finger in the air and sort of, Sometimes you have to make decisions that are very unpopular. And it's if you can't make a finding, or you see a project that does comply, even though people don't like it. I mean, the codes are put in place so that there's rules and expectations, and these rules govern the ability to develop your property in the city. And even if the neighbor hates it and it's really ugly and it's going to be not great, the problem lies with our city council and whoever put through those rules. And we can change those rules, but once those rules are in place, that's what you're entitled to do. And if we're not letting someone do it, we can't do it because people don't like it, because it's a bad project. It has to be because there's evidence that they have not proven that they're entitled to do it under the codes of the city. The Penn Central balancing test, this gives a more complicated analysis that deals more with legislation. This is a situation where you're trying to change the rules of development in the city or what's allowed. If someone has invested a lot of money, for a long period of time under the old rules, you can come into an issue with those expectations, especially if you have a retroactive ordinance that would, prevent someone remove something that they have. There are ways around it, having an amortization period. We want to say we can no longer have, restaurants in the city. And we would have a problem, everyone invested in making all these restaurants, they have these entitlements. You can do it over a long period of time if you want to do something along those lines. That's something that will help with if there's legislation that comes through, is just to be aware of it.
Sure. I have a question.
Yes.
Measure R, when the voters passed it, and then it was denied on appeal, right? So did the city ever appeal that, Measure R?
Measure R was the
Formula retail.
Yeah, the formula retail. Yeah, that was
Overturned.
That it was passed by the people, and then Judge Chalfant invalidated it. It was challenged in court.
So it never went beyond the second appeal?
I don't remember how far it went up. I'm sure, but it was invalidated by the courts.
So that's an example of.
Exactly. So they found that to be overreach in the city, and they invalidated it, and then came back with and put through the form of the retail ordinance that you guys are familiar with today. Other land use regulations, state planning law, it lays out, everyone has a general plan and a zoning ordinance. We talked about in the city, the coastal act applies throughout, and then permits that you're going to see are, coastal development permits, conditional use permits, other types of, approvals in the municipal code or the local coastal program, and these approvals all run with the land. We don't have approvals that are, these types of permits don't attach to an individual. That would be prohibited for a number of reasons. A lot dealing with potential discrimination issues. If you're going to issue for one person, you can just imagine the problems with how you're picking that. So it matters is the use and what you're being proposed for, and then that attaches to the land afterwards. Yes?
When there is a permit that runs with the land, can you get, like, in an emergency situation like what's going on now? Now, can you do a sunset clause on those, like say it ends at this time?
It's very difficult to have the sunset clause in terms of a time limitation. If you're talking about like a conditional use permit, you need to have a real strong reason about why it would need to expire. So it is potentially, in some circumstances, sort of project specific, that we would have to sort of, talk through. The one you guys dealt with Rocky's Lounge. So, in that case, it was very an odd sort of application because you had an approved conditional use permit and CDP to change and put a hotel in place. And then you had, before that's built, you had to come in and make a separate application for this conditional use permit. And the conditions and the projects conflict, so they could not ever exist at the same time. So it naturally, will terminate when that happens. You probably could put, a limitation in that case, but it'd be tied not to a moment in time, but to if we built the other project. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Fair hearings. So I want everyone to, as we said earlier, we want everyone to feel that they had a fair shot at everything and that they had an unbiased decision maker. So we want to announce the procedures up front. This is the big thing. So whatever rules that we have, we want to let everyone know before it starts. We don't want to start saying everyone gets 3 minutes and then we're like, man, there's a lot of people, we want to just wrap this up. Everyone gets 30 seconds now. That is not fair. Once we make that, unless there's a fire outside and we need to wrap up or something, we need to go adhere to whatever we put. Now you can reduce that, the commission or the chair can go and say, okay, we have 150 speakers here tonight. If we let them all speak, we'll be here until, tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So because of that, I'm giving everyone, 2 minutes or 1 minute. And, we can go and do that. You just need to announce it before you start. You want to main it? Yes.
So what about follow-up questions to applicants after they hear these public comments closed?
I generally don't recommend that you speak to anyone once the public hearing is closed, because that's when you want all the evidence, because once you do that, there's no chance for anybody to respond. Now, if you have a question after the public hearing's closed, you should direct it to staff. Staff should have any information that you need. If there is something that's specific to an applicant that you can't get from anywhere else, there are some circumstances where it's okay to go and do that. An example is if you're looking at potentially denying a project and you want to, ask them, do you want to continue this so that we can go and, rather than getting a denial, or do you want to do that? You can go bring them up to ask them that. If there's a factual issue, you bring them up. You can do it if you really need to, but then you need to give the other side the chance to sort of comment on it. But generally, you want to close that and be done with the record. I would just say their piece, up front. And if you have questions about the facts of it, you should be saying those. That's why before the public hearing starts, any commissioner questions or comments, that's when you should go raise it. So you're like, well, what kind of tree is that? Where's the bluff edge? What's this? You don't want to have an opinion, because you don't want to go, if you go and say, well, this project's terrible and, we're going to have to thumbs down it. If you say that before the public hearing, well, then you're showing bias and people have to do a fair hearing. But if you have legitimate questions, that's the time to do it. So to ask those questions before we do the public hearing, then not only the applicant and the opposition and the public all get a chance to go comment about it.
Yeah, but if the meeting is starting to go sideways because of no questions coming in ahead of time or concerns coming in ahead of time, it is okay to bring the applicant back up to the dispute.
Like I said, I discourage it, but we want to get the information out there, especially the planning commission. What you want to vet information, so there's maybe a little more flexibility at the planning commission to doing it, because any problems can be cured if there's an appeal to the city council. But really, you should try to get your questions out before anyone gets a chance to talk, and you should, because it's unfair, right? I mean, that's the problem is if you close the public hearing and now you're like, well, I want the applicant to come up, and they might think, well, that's just because the applicant's his buddy, and like they're giving him more time to speak, or they're like, I want, this neighbor to come up and speak more. And we don't ever just let someone come up and speak. If you have a specific factual question, you should go first to staff. If staff can't answer, they need the help, then you really need to get that answer. You could go do that. You reopen the public hearing, then you got it. But we do our best to make it fair if you have to do that.
It's not okay to ask the applicant, is that okay with you if we do it this way? That's an opinion, right, instead of a fact?
Well, here's what I would say is if, the applicants come through with a proposed project and, they have a right to thumbs up or thumbs down, right on it. So if you're in a situation where, would you rather have a denial, we're going to condition it like this?
No, I mean an actual condition. In other words, do you want to stay open till 12 instead of 11 after the hearing's closed?
I wouldn't recommend, doing that, especially to expand, the amount of time. It's really for you guys to evaluate the evidence presented of, what the impacts are from a project. And if you think that generally, whatever they propose is what they're asking for, if you want to call it back, then, that's okay. Shouldn't be bringing the applicant up generally to do that. Also, if you're expanding the hours of operation, it's a problem, because there might be someone out there who's like, oh, I didn't care if this closed at 10 o'clock, but if you're letting it open until 3 in the morning, well, then I had stuff I wanted to say, about it.
Well, yeah, I'm just gonna chime in.
Okay.
So I know what John and Drew are talking about, but you have your facts, okay? And you understand that, and obviously the project, and we're sitting up there and a lot of different things come up during the course of the meeting. Sometimes it's a safety factor, sometimes, somebody lets, and we do need to address the applicant again and to not give them the opportunity to respond. We think we are gonna let this pass as long as you build a 50-foot wall right in front of your front door. Or I'm exaggerating. But in that case, maybe that would be totally prohibitive for that applicant, and maybe it wouldn't, we wanna know if we're gonna, if we're gonna push it forward, or if we're gonna have that condition, we wanna understand it from the builder side of things. So we bring the applicant up and we ask, and usually that helps us get to a resolution.
Okay. So in those circumstances, first, I mean, the applicant does have a ability to go respond, they get a rebut, so they do have a chance to go address these things. If something comes up, especially if you're considering a condition, that'd be a situation, I would phrase it differently. I would say, we can make the findings, if we're gonna put this condition in here, and you can ask them, if you want to accept that or if you want to have a denial, so they have a right to an up or down vote on it. So if you bring it up to ask them that question, I think that's okay. Okay?
Okay.
But do you have to open the hearing for everybody else to comment back?
Generally not if you're just asking if you want a denial or if you want the condition. If you're getting into some kind of factual issue, I mean, it's an art, not a science. You're trying to make sure that everyone has a fair opportunity. So if something's coming up and you're letting one side address it, because if they say one sentence where yes, we'll take it, but it starts saying yeah, and and blah blah blah, and I think start making other arguments about things, and you want to have the other side to be able to have a chance.
But it's a denial or acceptance decision. It's not what do you want.
Right. But generally, it's just us and the applicant. Most of the time, there isn't anybody. It's us just trying to make the right decision for the project. There's usually nobody else there.
Well, if there's nobody speaking and there's only one person, then reopen the public hearing is not a big deal because you're going to speak. Anyone else who wants to speak can go and speak, and you can reclose it. So if you're in that situation, wouldn't be. Yes.
I feel a lot of the times the questions that are being referenced right now are kind of more for clarification on things. And I think what I'm hearing from you is it would be smarter for us to better be directing us as staff, which a lot of them are.
Yep.
And then let the staff, if they feel, hey, I can't really answer this properly, let them bring the applicant back up.
Yep.
To have that.
That's what I would recommend. Start with the staff. Okay? Yes.
And what are the parameters for conducting research or making an informed decision?
So here's what I would say is you are not an advocate. You're not, I think I'm surviving. You're not an advocate, and that's the problem is that if you are advocating for a position, you're out there, researching and trying to, kill a project or support a project, that's going to evidence bias, and you're going to have a problem, and you need to recuse yourself, and if you don't, then you may be subject to a problem, due process fair hearing argument when it goes up. You should be reading your staff report. You should be, researching, the code and the law, as that's, put into there. You're welcome to go visit the site. If you do, visit the site, because, seeing that can make a difference. Some people are visual, or tactile learners, and they want to be able to see something. But you need to disclose that before the hearing so everyone can talk about it, because you might misperceive something. And so you need to put that out there so everyone has a chance to address the evidence, in advance. But you should not be out there putting together a brief. And, if you're showing up with a brief about that, I mean, how does everyone feel? Like if, you show up and someone, has a treatise and they're out there, during your project, you don't feel that it was an unbiased situation. So get into research, get out your notes, but you want to avoid, advocating. Yes?
Sorry, and then quality control. Let's say somebody's contracted the city and they say, we provide this service, and is it allowed for you to drive around and make sure that service is provided?
Can you give me want to give me a more specific example?
Let's say somebody's, I don't want to disclose it, maybe I should talk.
How about I disclose something? So say there's a bus line that wants to come into the city, so they contact an individual and say, we provide this service, we'd love for you to learn more. Is that okay for a commissioner to actually do that research on that particular one? Or should it be something available for this?
Okay. So
Hands off and something else.
It depends also on the topic. So you've been talking a lot about public hearings, and that is a lot more constrained because you're quasi-judicial, you're a judge. I mean, it's supposed to be everyone presents the sides and you decide the evidence. You're not out there gathering the evidence yourself. If you have a question about the evidence, you should tell staff beforehand. So if you think there's something wrong, or you need more information about, where things are situated, tell staff, they'll take a picture. It also saves you a huge headache in the future if there's a challenge in court, where if you took a picture and you did the research, you're gonna be on the stand, they're gonna depose you, and they're gonna be asking you all these questions about how did you take that picture, why'd you take it, was it fair, all these things. Otherwise, you have staff unbiased, doing it. And so what information is asked for it, but generally have staff, do it. And if you're in a situation where a lot of our commissions are, out there to, gather information. So if you're coming with a policy, choice, you're making a recommendation to the council on that, you have a lot more discretion to go out there and, do research and bring information, to it. You're not in a quasi-judicial situation. You're in a legislate, trying to think what's best for the city. So you want to do that kind of research if that's what you're working on.
So for example, a security company claims that they provide 6 cars every day to the burn areas, right?
Okay.
You want to make sure there are 6 cars in, let's say, Big Rock or Forest area. Would I be allowed to drive up and down and just see for myself?
You can go and do that. Probably have staff do research for you if you want, but you're welcome to go and, do that. You need to disclose it and say that I, drove on these days and this is what I saw, but yes.
And then so it's, maybe I should just also give my car dash cam to provide that or
If
something.
you're taking, be careful, because if you're taking videos and pictures, then you're creating public records that could be disposable and things like that. If you want to take video, it's like evidence or pictures, like I said, it's better to have staff do it. We can talk more maybe about a particular situation, because, you need to know more about, these are areas where it can be very problematic if it's an entitlement application, different if you're looking at making a policy recommendation legislative.
And one last thing, and I promise I'm done. But are we allowed to ask a journalist to do it, or no? Just that?
Surrogate.
It would be investigative reporting, right?
Yeah, I don't know, because
Sorry, just saying.
There's no prohibition against it.
yeah.
There's no prohibition against it.
It's a little odd to, recruit, press to go and do things. If it was an application, I would say you shouldn't do that, because it might be showing you're trying to, advocate or, get press to go for or against something. If it's, like I said, a legislative item or some kind of other policy choice, there's a lot more reach for who you can talk to. It's not, you're allowed to talk to the media, that's not.
I'll check with you later. No,
Yeah.
yes, thanks.
Okay.
So hypothetical question.
Okay.
Planning Commission. A commissioner comes in with a phone book of concerns, doesn't share it with the other commissioners prior to the hearing, and then tries to sell the commission on those concerns during the commissioner comments of the hearing. Is there?
You mean during deliberation?
Yeah, during deliberation.
No, you're saying before. You say during deliberation, you're saying they're asking the questions of staff before the.
No, they're not asking the questions of staff. It's during the conversations between the commissioners.
So you're allowed to, do preparation, and to make, transitory notes.
But they should be sharing it with the rest of the commissioners prior to.
No, if you're taking your own personal notes, so that, if you're highlighting or circling, so you have, if there's topics that you want to bring up, you're welcome to, you actually shouldn't be sharing that in advance because you have a Brown Act issue, because you're sharing your opinion with the rest of the commission.
Mm-hmm.
So it's okay to have some notes, but like I said, be judicious in it. If you're making a big tome of, arguments, and reading off of that, people will notice that and, they'll have an opinion, but you can do preparation. It is okay to have notes.
Well, in that case, when you ask staff questions, and they give you answers, I've always been told you're not allowed to tell anybody what answers you got. And staff does not send those questions as correspondence to the commission. So how is that square with?
So you're intertwining a couple of things here. So first, if there's a informational question about an item that you raise, is the bluff edge here, is, this the boundary, is this whatever, you raise it to staff. Staff generally will want to, give that information, and will just not reveal that you're asking a question, not revealing your thought process. Will say, hey, here's some more information, I'm distributing it to the commission there, or if they need more time, do it, during the presentation. So they should bring information, to the rest of the commission. If you're speaking with a staff member and discussing an item, you're welcome to, say, what it is, unless it's speaking with me or Kellen, and you have an attorney-client privilege, if it's something about liability or something like that. If you're talking about planning issues, you're welcome to say, I spoke with Tyler, and he said that, we need to consider this, or this is how this policy applies. That's okay to say.
I've only done that on disclosure, but I've never once had staff send my questions to the commissioners, or the answers. Prior to the meeting.
I don't recommend you send out your questions or forward them, but if there's new information, then all the commissioners have the same amount of information.
Okay, and then another thing is, on this, you were talking about doing your own research. For example, one of the lines, 2 lines we get on every single house is neighborhood character, is there are 1- and 2-story houses in the neighborhood. Well, that isn't a whole lot of information. So you can go out and actually find out what the neighborhood looks like.
You're welcome to drive through the neighborhood. I would recommend, though, if you're not getting enough information to evaluate neighborhood character, you can tell staff, I need more information about, this envelope of what this is. And if you go and do your own research, then it starts looking like you may be advocating, but you need to disclose it. So if you go through, like I drove down the street and I saw there's a lot of 2-story houses stated out there, and then the applicant and the public and everyone can comment and say, well, actually, that street is an anomaly, or actually that looks like a 2-story, but it's not. They can address it. Well, they say, actually, there's a whole bunch more of those on this street. So if you disclose it, that's up front, then everybody has a chance to test it. But in general, the recommendation is to have staff do the research. So
But if they always say the same thing, that's not really research.
Well, I'm just gonna say, we have this issue come up, and when we discussed neighborhood character, staff did present a map. They did present a ratio of sizes of homes. They did present, percentages to make a determination of general neighborhood character.
Which was presented by the applicant, not the staff.
Well, neighborhood character is something that people have different opinions about. I mean, it wasn't until, I don't remember how many years ago, there used to not be any analysis of, square footage or different things. It's an evolving, determination. And it may not be enough information for you to make a determination, but it may be a determination that others can make. That you go off what the information is that's presented. You need to be able to have substantial evidence to support your decision, whichever way you go.
So I hear that we should be asking staff for some opinions and research, but I also understand that staff is overworked and, I think that it would be good for us to know the rules on how much commissioners can be interacting with staff or what the guardrails are, so there's a balance for me to know.
Thank you for raising that. That was a topic of discussion this very morning. So the trick to it is that as a commissioner or a council member, you need the information to be able to make your decision. If you don't have that, you need it, and that you need to make that request to staff. The trick is that you need to do it through, for the commissioners, your liaison, or for the council members through the city manager, and then you say, I need this information, or if our city manager tells you to work directly with the community development director or planner, then you work directly, with them. So you want that information. Those are fair requests, and you should be getting that. The farther you can make that request, the better, so staff can coordinate it. But if you don't have the information you need, how are you going to make a decision?
That was
And it's much better to make the request in advance than to come to the council meeting and say, I need this information, let's continue the item. And then everyone wastes their time, right?
I was just going to mention that for at least 3 of our commissioners on a fairly regular basis, if the questions that they pose to a case planner need the case planner to do additional analysis that was not already in the report, our practice is to anonymize the questions and provide the responses. So it might not look like the question that you submitted, John, but your questions have been distributed to everybody with responses, but rewritten in a way to not disclose that they came from you specifically.
And when we're doing that,
and it's only if it's adding new information.
Yeah. And if we're doing that, we want to make sure that how it's phrased is just information. informational, and it doesn't reflect an opinion or anything. Yes.
Okay, so I have a question totally different than your planning commission. I'm having an issue with people during their public comments speaking about other people's children. So I don't know, like in your 3 minutes, like they can just say whatever they want. I don't, like, do we have the ability to stop? I know only the chair technically can do that. But do we have some guardrails onto what we can allow? Just with kids is my issue.
What are people saying about people's
Yeah.
kids?
Well, just the swim club drama. Just the swim club drama has ignited some stuff. So anyway,
Okay.
I kind of went out and I said, can you guys please not speak about other people's kids, right? And now they're attacking me and they're doing a whole public records thing on me, which they get to do. But I'm just curious as like, do you have any?
How far does the first one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Very far.
What you're doing is exactly the right thing. Is it's starting to be a problem. Is to for the chair to stay up front. Hey, we need to have decorum. Here. Let's not make personal attacks. Let's keep focused on the business. That's what matters here. And it's really inappropriate to be attacking someone else's, especially someone's children. My God.
Minors are protected.
And that's what you can do, is try to do your best to sort of, we can help, give you some language to do that. Sounds like you've done a good job.
But I mean, I'm not the chair, so that's my main question. Because like, if you are not the chair, but you're still on this commission, are you allowed to say something, or?
So, generally the chair controls, but, I think it's okay to, permission from the chair. I just want to say, we should, let's keep this, above board. Let's, have decorum and, respect for each other. In terms of shutting people down, it is difficult, in order to do that. If somebody is not talking about a topic, we have an item, we're discussing, the plans for, the hours of operation of, the pool or whatever, and someone's talking about, Little League or something else, not a topic, give them a warning, hey, we're talking about this, if you want to talk about that, you have to do it either the general items not on the agenda portion or on an agenda item for this. If they don't respect that, you can cut them off because, it's not on the agenda. They don't have a right to go speak about random things about a particular topic. If they are creating a disruption, that's the other time that you can, shut them down. If somebody is, out of control, attacking someone, creating an environment where you can't conduct the meeting, can shut them out, but they must be warned first. There's specific rules about this that you must give them warning and say, excuse me, Mr. Jones, you are creating a disruption. You need to be able to conduct this meeting. The way that you are, behaving yourself is creating this. We can't operate. Give them a warning and then say, if you continue doing it, we'll have to cut you off and we'll have to remove you from the room. And you can do that, but it's definitely not recommended that happens. Call or text us, or the staff should, because you want to make sure.
But technically, their time would stop, and then they get that additional time after. Usually, these speakers are people that want their whole 3 minutes, right? So if you're going to pause them, the timer has to stop, and then it would resume once they start again.
If you're briefly admonishing them, I don't think you need to stop the timer. They've sort of, been creating a disruption or speaking off, so I don't think you need to go and, be super strict. If you go and spend 2 minutes, admonishing them, well, you erase someone's time by us sort of taking it. So that's what I would say about that.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I'm still trying to figure out, so about the quality control research, right? So I'm gonna ask the chair for permission, for example, and then I can, for example, email, for example, Noah, and ask him to actually drive around, that, just to make sure the parameters are respected, if I don't have knowledge of how to do it. So isn't that selfish on my part to just spend like 4 hours driving, or?
Well, I would say try to be, moderate your requests. It'll be up to staff about whether they're going to allocate the resources to do it. So I would start if you have a request with, staff. They may not have the resources to do it. And then, if they don't, then, especially if it's not a public hearing, you can go and do something. If there's particularly issues, I think we should talk about it. I want to make sure I give you good advice specific to what you're looking at.
And Trevor, if I can tap on this, when you have requests for use of staff time, if you go to the director of liaisons, that would be Susan for you, not just your recording secretary.
Oh, cool. Thank
Also,
you.
I think that the cars have some kind of tracking for the homes do, and we could just ask the director.
Trevor, I want to.
Where the cars drive
Folks,
around.
you're going to get a copy of this after the meeting. We'll send it to everyone. So questions, please send them to Trevor or myself. I know some people do have schedules, so yeah, we're overtime. So
Can you tell us who our liaison is? Because last time we had that training, I was told only the city manager or the city treasurer or the city attorney can talk.
what we'll do when we send this out is every commission will send a liaison list to you, so you know who your liaison person is.
It should have been Maria. I don't know if it's going to be Rhonda or Tyler.
We'll send that out.
So, okay. All right, we'll try to move this a little faster. When a welcoming environment, even for unpopular views, that's part of why we don't encourage or allow applause, so you don't intimidate people from having opinions different from the crowd. Because even if you have a majority in a room, that might not reflect even the majority of the city. Just because someone's loud doesn't mean they should dominate. How we conduct our meetings. Listen to opinions. People come and say, I like it, I don't like it, but you need to rely on facts. And so you should focus on relevant issues. Make sure you have evidence to support the decision that you're going to make. State your reasons so that everyone understands why you're making a decision. It's not just because you like it, you don't like it. And make sure you make your ex-parte disclosures of people you meet with and evidence that you have received that is not in the public record before the public hearing, so it can be addressed by everyone. Findings. So substantial evidence is what you need. So that's relevant information that a reasonable mind might accept to support a conclusion. Evidence is facts, reasonable assumptions predicated on facts, expert opinions supported by facts. Not evidence, argument, speculation, unsubstantiated opinion, clearly inaccurate or not credible statements. So when you're listening about evidence coming in, you need to hear some things a non-expert could go opine on. There's a tree in this location, there's this or that. If you're going to have someone come and say, oh, it looks really unstable, well, are you a geotechnical expert? Did you get a study done? Have you done the research? You can't just go on just because someone says something, doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean that it's evidence that you can rely on. The role of findings, very important. Findings provide a written explanation of why, legally and factually, a public agency is making a particular decision. They also provide a framework for you to make your decisions, and they enhance the integrity of the process. They help guide your analysis. This is what you should be looking at, this is what findings need to be made. And also, by focusing on those findings, it reduces the likelihood that you'll randomly leap to conclusions or make a decision that's not supported by the evidence. It also enables applicants and other parties to determine whether and what basis they should seek judicial review and understand, especially if it's an appealable decision, where the weaknesses are or what the issues are that have been concerning. It also helps dissuade parties from challenging well-reasoned decisions. If you have a decision that's based on strong evidence, it very likely will not be challenged in court. It also informs the court that you are making a fair process and explains the decision. You will get deference, but if you're not basing your decision on evidence, you won't get that deference. And then finally, it also provides guidance to future applicants. It shows what the commission environment is looking at and what kind of evidence is needed to demonstrate the findings that are needed. We talked about conditions, excess and proportionality are needed. Also, when you're doing condition, make sure it's enforceable. Having a condition out there that is not going to be enforceable is not worth putting in. It's just a waste of everyone's time, and it generates complaints. So think about that. Some conditions are, in an area where you can't see. If you're requiring someone to, put their patio furniture away or do something, they would never be enforceable. So be able to see it. Don't create the problem for code enforcement. You might be able to prove it. Political reform act. Kellen, talk a little bit. We talk a little about economic interest, conflicts of interest.
You can answer more questions.
Yeah, let's get through this, and then anyone wants to stay, we'll stay as long as you want.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kellen Martz. I'm the Assistant City Attorney, if I haven't met you. I was going to do a 3 lawyers walking to a bar joke, but we don't have time, so we're going to move through this. Okay, the Political Reform Act. It's a state law. It was passed. California was the first state to pass an ethics and governance reform after Watergate. So this is where this came from. It's about disclosures, ethics. We fill out our Form 700s with the city that gets sent to the state. You have to disclose your economic interests. So we don't have a water gate, people are funneling things through the back door. We have to disclose business investments, sources of income, employment, real property, so home property, gifts, and personal finances. If you are involved in a decision and you have property and it is within 500 feet of the subject property, there is presumed to be a financial effect where you have to recuse. There are a few exceptions, but they have to be discussed with either the city attorney's office or the FPPC. The middle category, 500 and 999 feet away, there is a financial effect. If it's material, if the decision could change the development potential, so if there's a subject property 550 feet away from you, and you're saying, oh, you could build one house, now you can build two, it might make your property more valuable. Same with income producing potential. If there's a zoning change and before short-term rentals were banned and now they're allowed, that might affect the value of your property. And so highest and best use, character, or the market value. If you make a vote that changes the value, doubles the value of your home, that would qualify. If you're 1,000 feet or more away, the financial effect on your decisions is presumed not to be material unless there's clear and convincing evidence. So those are types of things you really don't need to disclose unless maybe you know the person or there's some other thing that would really stick out in your mind or stick out in the mind of someone from the public about why, even though you're far away, your vote would change the value of your property. If in these categories, the answer is yes, 1, almost always, 2, most likely, 3, probably not, but they all have exceptions. If that's the case, you have to recuse. And in a financial recusal, you need to say why. You need to leave the room, wait, the chair needs to wait before proceeding until you're out of the room, and then they can proceed with that item. The consent agenda exception is those rules still apply if there's something on the consent agenda. However, you don't have to leave the room because you're not having a hearing on it, you're not discussing it. The way it works in a consent agenda is if there's 10 items on there, you say, I am recusing myself from 2B, and that's it. So you will vote on everything but 2B, and then they would record it differently in the minutes. But because there's no discussion, you don't need to leave the room and go through that process. All right? Other types of recusal issues, due process. So the Political Reform Act is kind of bright line rules that are put in place. The law is the law. Due process is that fun, squishy-feely type of law where lawyers get involved. So it's common law, it's built out of case law, it's not 500 feet, here's the rule, you've got to recuse. So what does due process mean for people appearing before the city? They have to be given notice. Clerk sends out notices all the time, right? We can't have a fair system if people don't know that we're making votes and decisions here. So they need to have a notice, they need to have an opportunity to be heard. We give that through a public comment, we give that through the time that applicants are given to present their projects, and then they have to have fair and impartial decision makers. That's part of why we're all here, to make sure that we're doing the best we can to be fair and impartial in all the decisions we make. That's why it's required that if you have ex-party contacts, that means contacts outside of the hearings, that you disclose those. That's why we do disclosures before we hear our planning commission items and that type of thing. So if you talk to people outside of the process that may impact the decision you make, either for or against, you need to disclose, hey, I had a conversation with the applicant or the applicant's attorney or the neighbors, and put that onto the record so everyone is clear of the conversations that went on that impact our decisions. Another of our squishy-feely common law. So a lot of, back in the day, the laws were just common law. They were out of case law, they weren't written in stone, and so the common law bias doctrine is based on the idea that you have to be disinterested, diligent, and you have to be working primarily for the benefit of the public. Most of you here, we don't get paid, for being on commissions. You get your free sandwiches and stuff, but your primary benefit is for the benefit of the public. And, you know, I used to be a commissioner in West Hollywood on a rent control board. I did it because I loved helping the city, and that's why I think the majority of you are here is, you know, the benefit of the public. So that is a requirement under the common law bias doctrine, is your votes and your work has to be primarily for the benefit of the public. And then you also can't place yourself in a position where your private personal interests may conflict with your duties. So if you do have private personal interests, you need to recuse yourself. And that's okay. If there's a project that comes before and you're like, I hate the person, I hate the project, you can hate it for any reason or dislike it, the color of the paint, or, you know, whatever. It is completely okay to just say, I'm recusing on this item. And unlike in the financial disclosures, you don't have to put on the record the reason why.
You just say you hate them.
Yes, you could say, I don't advise saying I hate the person, but you sure could if you wanted to. Best practices. These are, you know, kind of life things, but if you can't be fair, don't participate. Avoid statements before the close of the hearing. You need to let everyone present, and then you can state your thinking. Don't advocate for or against or provide aid. So, you know, if there's an applicant, you probably shouldn't be, you know, giving them money or giving them, you know, social media posts or anything like that on a project. As staff, I think we talked about that earlier. Staff is here to help you. If you have questions on the project, hey, I don't know about XYZ, can you look into that for me? And to the question on time, routed through the liaisons, we, either myself or other staff, will say, hey, that's a little bit too much. Make the ask if you need the help, and then, you know, as much as staff can, they will try to get you that information. Make decisions on the administrative record. The staff report, the attachments to it, that is what you should be making your statements, your findings on, not, you know, I saw them at this restaurant and they did this or that, you know, because if these things ever go to court, it needs to be based on what is the record, what did all the commissioners have in their hands to make a decision on. That's the requirement. Avoid the appearance of bias, pay attention, and above all, you'll be judged by your fairness and integrity. People are watching, you know, so do your best, be fair, have integrity. A couple quick hypos. A planning commissioner rents an apartment, it's a month-to-month basis. They're next to a property whose owner is seeking a variance to build a home that will interfere with their ocean views. The commissioner opposed the variance application, either they wrote a letter or appeared before the zoning administrator, who then approved it. The person who lost the variance before the administrator has now appealed, and the matter is before the commission on which Planning Commissioner Brown sits. Can they hear that item?
No.
Good job. No. So this isn't, this is several different reasons. It's not affecting their financial impacts because they're a renter, it's month to month, but it's that common law doctrine of bias. They can't be a neutral decision maker when they have that much involvement, and they clearly dislike the project. Their views are gone. Due process concerns, bias, lack of impartiality, personal private stake in the outcome. I think we have one more hypo. A planning commissioner wrote a blog post stating that a controversial development proposal would impact critical wildlife habitat and important views in the community. Can Commissioner Jones participate?
No.
Yes.
The answer is no. They have clearly shown a bias against the project ahead of time.
We get all lawyer on you, because Rick's old Berger's case, and you can't.
We can talk about it after.
If you're talking about a council member having opinions before the election versus you're talking about advocating.
The council member can even leave the account and still decide. Let's not bore the rest of these folks with this.
Would we save?
What's the timing on this? For example, today the lights are out on the highway. And so somebody puts on the blog, the lights are on at point two. And I go, that sucks. How long does that sucks bias me from being able to hear a light being getting a battery?
This is a bar exam question. You'd probably be okay saying that sucks. Case by case basis, you know, if you have a question, you know, should I recuse on this? Ask us. Again, also, if you write, you know, there's a piece of art that's getting put in here, Arts Commission says, I'm gonna do that, or it's on their agenda, as a planning commissioner, you can say that, or that's not your commission. So there's that line again about the different commissions, yes.
What are the ramifications for not recusing yourself?
If the city gets sued, in extreme cases, there can be personal liability. Generally, the city may cover you. It really depends, so we always have to be careful. If you step too far out of the lines, the city gets sued, there's gonna be legal costs there. And if you've gone far, far beyond what's allowed, the city may not be able to cover your legal costs. That's one of them. Publicity, public records requests, all the stuff that a fair amount of you deal with here and there.
And invalidate the decision.
And it can, yes, invalidate the decision. If a court finds that there was improper bias, they could cancel it, they could make the city start from scratch, they could make you recuse yourself, those type of things. Yes.
On financial disclosure, you don't have to disclose anything outside of the city.
That is correct.
Well, if he has somebody, a financial issue with someone carrying forward, whether it's in the city or not.
Yes, but on the real property,
Yeah,
yes.
or stock investments.
No.
Yes, Trevor's correct. If you have stock in Boeing and they're building a factory here and you're
No, I
gonna.
meant they're building a factory in Seattle, not here. You don't disclose your own home.
You're only disclosing
No.
if there's a financial interest in the
project here.
proposed before you.
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking about the Form 7.
Form 700?
You would disclose if you have Tesla stock, Tesla has a retail center now, you would disclose that.
Correct. And there's a little gray area, but yes, generally, more disclosure is the way to recommend. If Tesla has a store here, then yes, you would want
And
to.
if you've had financial dealings or worked for the applicant,
If they're salary, anything like that. If you work for the applicant, again,
in the past.
It'd be a financial source.
yes,
So that would go in your recusal or plan commission.
it could, yes, absolutely.
If there's a project and it has something that we're on record deliberating whether or not this basement is safe, and then we agree that the project is okay because it's going to building safety, it's close to building safety, and they approve it, and then it turns out it wasn't safe, and there's a fire and 17 people die, are we in some way liable and we could be part of the lawsuit as commissioners?
I mean, we're not going to go into individual projects. That sounds very individually specific, but
If we pass something that turns
but
out it was a
in
safety
general,
violation.
in general, no. If you've made the findings, it's the city is making the decision. It's not you personally.
We're not guaranteeing the safety of people's projects, we're just evaluating whether the findings can be made for under our code to allow it to be built. They make the decision about whether they want to actually build it, and they're responsible for how they build it.
What if there's an interpretation that says you should, you have to consider that published interpretation of the city?
We've already gone through interpretations. That's separate.
Can we get back to the Brown Act class and not the planning commission class? So, I'm serious, I mean, some of us, we work.
100%. Yeah. So
We
we're
can,
gonna.
we can submit questions after.
100%.
Okay.
Likewise, you're going to get this in an email. You're going to get your liaisons in an email. If you have questions, Brown Act rules, individually to Trevor and myself, not to your commission as a whole, or send them to your liaison. One person. That'd be great.
And if you do need to leave, make sure you sign it.
What's that?
Let me get through the slides and we'll take questions.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, we're almost done. Gifts. So a gift is anything of value that provides a personal benefit for which adequate consideration means compensation. So if you haven't paid for it, either through actual money or through doing work for them or some other form of compensation, that's what a gift is. You have to disclose gifts over $50 on your Form 700s and whatnot. You are disqualified from hearing an item where a person or an entity has given you $630 in a 12-month period. And you are not allowed to take, so you must refuse gifts over $630 from that person or that entity in the calendar year, yes. You can do refunds to get away from breaking these rules. Those are all exceptions. Bottom line, watch your calendar, 12 months, estimate, track. Disclosures, if you get a gift from, not me, but someone else, $25, bucket of candy, and then you get another 25, you've now hit your $50, you gotta dispose. It's not in one lump sum. Special exceptions, there can be family exceptions, there can be emergency situations, call us. That is the end of it. So I'm gonna say, if you need to leave, now is a great time to do it. You've done it. Questions, we'll be here.
If you haven't signed in though, please sign in before you leave.
Please sign
Is
in.
that 12 months on both, or calendar year on one, or 12 months?
You'll be there, right? For certain?
All these.
Yeah.
This is for the forms
You're
that
right.
have been filing, they're
It's
planning
not a
commission.
moving, no.
You're not
Calendar.
gonna
I'm gonna be walking, I'll be.
Do you need an intro?
No, I'll be okay.
What I'm saying, you're gonna be there, right? With
Watch out for that
Sarah.
tripod.
So it is
What do we gotta do?
Around the corner.
On the disc golf.
Yep. All right, any questions? Anybody? Everyone's free to go if you want to stay around and ask questions, go.
Okay, the general plan. So, do all commissions have to consider the general plan? Or planning commission only?
Well, the general plan is a guidance document, it's a
But
policy
it's part of,
document.
it's part of the code.
It's
More than guidance document.
It is a guidance document, it's implemented into our municipal code. So if you're gonna try to turn a project down, or you have to identify a provision in the municipal code that would justify it, you can't, because there's a lot of policies in the general plan, and some can conflict with each other in particular situations. And so you can't just pick a policy out of the general plan and say, because of this, I'm turning it down. You have to be able to use that, extract it, and use the municipal code.
You know, my question is, do other commissions consider that, or just?
I mean, if the council sends them a project, like a legislative item, or they want them to weigh in, they could potentially do it. But it generally comes into play for legislation, because any legislation you pass and municipal code that we're putting through needs to, be consistent with the general plan. That's a fine council have to make.
For the planning commission, should commissioners express their concerns prior to opening the public hearing?
What, if you have questions?
Concerns or questions?
Yeah.
Concerns.
Concerns and questions are two different
Yeah,
things.
if you have an opinion about the project, you should
not hear it.
Questions that remain after they've heard, like, say, the staff presentation.
Yeah, if you have questions and you're like, well, what's the story on this, or, where's the bluff edge, where's, the setback, ask those questions before the public hearing so everyone can weigh in on them. So if it's informational, yes. If you're like, oh, I'm really worried about whether I can approve this project, no, you don't want to make your decision on that. You want everyone to go provide the evidence, and then you're going to make a decision about that. No deliberations beforehand, but informational questions. Please get those out before the public hearing.
Okay.
So, could you elaborate on one of the items, I think it was about 6 slides ago, about fairness? It said that the commissioner should not make any statements before the close of the hearing. Oh, there we go, right there.
Yeah.
Second item, avoid statements before the close of a hearing.
Yes, you shouldn't make an opinion, like this project is awesome and we should go approve it until you've heard all the evidence. That's what it means.
Okay, so hearing is,
The hearing is the public is speaking, and then that's closed, and then you want to have your
oh,
deliberation.
perfect, yeah, thank you, that makes sense.
Okay. Yes.
Do you think it would be wise to have a separate one of these for planning commission? I know everybody's short on time, but it seems like that came up a lot.
It's the
No,
hardest.
just do it on paper, just do it on paper.
Planning is the
But I'm
hardest
saying,
one.
I mean,
We can
it's-
discuss.
Yeah, we'll discuss, maybe.
Yeah, if we have more questions,
Oh, the mobile home.
we're happy to have
Look at they're bringing
additional,
that back.
training or anything. Yeah.
Well, I think it's different than, because they are approving projects.
Yes.
Where the other commissions really are
Advice.
Advisory.
Yes.
Except for the mobile homes, you're also going to have
Right.
Yeah,
residential.
could be good. Has that ever happened in the city where just the planning commission has had one of these kind of think tanks?
We used to do this training specifically for planning commission, then we expanded it to include all the commissioners. Okay. Any other? Yes.
I think that for the planning commission, you guys should have something that is read about questions before you guys start the public comment, right? Because I'm just saying that's come up a lot since we've been in here. Like, you know how you say, okay, now we're opening up for commissioner comments, now we're opening up for public comments. To have something where you say, okay, this is the time for commissioners to have any questions.
Oh, yeah.
Are there any questions about the project?
That happens.
Oh, that's already part of your thing?
Yeah.
Oh, Then why,
Good.
okay.
That's during each individual applicant's portion.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that does happen.
okay. Well, sorry, that's been a big debate in here, so.
All right, well, I don't see any more questions, so thank you all for coming.
Thank
Sorry
you.
we ran
Thank you
long.
so much.
Thank you for coming.
If we have recusal,